Thank you for being here on this very auspicious occasion. On behalf of Dr. Malusi Harrison, Campus President, I'd like to welcome you to the Padron campus. And on behalf of Miami-Dade College School of Education and the Padron campus, I would like to welcome you to our third annual Love, Grow, Learn conference. This conference has focused on current research conducted around learning. In 2017, our first year, we hosted Fundación Querer, a group of neuroscientists from New York who are conducting research around language acquisition among children with severe learning differences. Last year, we hosted 3 local researchers who presented research that they are conducting today in young children in early childhood settings. This year, we will learn about learning and the brain and educational neuroscience, and I am so excited. But before you find out why I'm so excited, I would like to invite Dr. Loretta Overeye, who is the Dean of Faculty at Padron Campus, to share greetings and information concerning the Social Sciences Retreat.
Good morning, everybody. So glad to see all your faces here, up early and ready to be engaged, excited about our discipline and learning. So today we are doing something unique. We have invited a group from the social sciences for our retreat. So we're participating in this morning's events, and then we will break up this afternoon for our discipline work. So after this session ends at about 12 o'clock, please proceed right across to 401 for the beginnings of our discipline meetings. Just a sort of housekeeping, restrooms are just right out this door on your left, and I mean this left. If you need anything, please turn off your cell phones, or at least put it on mute. Do take the opportunity today to engage with our wonderful speaker. We do have some copies of the books which are outside if you want to grab it later on and engage with him, potentially have him sign your copy. We would be very glad that that occurred. So enjoy the day, learn, love, grow. See you later. Loretta.
Thank you. Those of you who know me know that I talk a lot about brain-based learning and educational neuroscience. I talk about it a lot, a whole lot. Almost nauseatingly so. And if you look around at my colleagues, they're nodding their heads because they're saying, yeah, that's the nerd that she is. My personal journey into the brain and educational neuroscience began when I was in grade 4, about 10 years old. I noticed that I could memorize lyrics to any Beatles, Rolling Stones, Beach Boy songs, but I couldn't memorize the preamble to the Constitution. Prayers that were sung, yes. Prayers that were recited, no. And so I made up silly songs like Weird Al Yankovic's my whole life in order to memorize and learn concepts. I didn't know Roy G. Biv. I knew his mirror image brother, Vibgyor. I didn't know that the Great Lakes spelled out Holmes, but I knew that they spelled Schmo, which is much closer to me ethnically. All the way through my doctoral program, where I was asked a question about go die during my oral exams. Go die is the acronym for curriculum development. Goals, objectives, design, implementation, evaluation. You're welcome. And so, through my schooling, I not only learned, but I also reflected on how my learning took place. What I remembered, what I forgot. Why I did well in subjects and not well in others. And of course, I have chosen a field that allows me to continue this study over the course of my lifetime. I've been very fortunate to find strong support for brain-based learning and educational neuroscience amongst my colleagues in the School of Education. In 2012, we embarked as a school to embed the latest research in educational neuroscience into our programs. Since that time, and certainly during our current curriculum revision, we have continued to focus on educational neuroscience. Our early childhood faculty have always known the importance of brain development in educational neuroscience, as most brain development occurs between birth and age 5. Our K-12 teacher education program faculty have adopted these strategies and methodologies to make their classrooms come alive with meaningful, active learning. Miami-Dade College School of Education was so fortunate to have an internationally recognized educational neuroscience as the consultant on the project. He shared, and I quote, "Very few schools of education nationwide have taken this bold and groundbreaking step. The fact that the School of Education's faculty and administration were committed to this speaks very highly of their professionalism and dedication." And so today's conference gives me joy on 2 levels. First, it is obvious that I'm very interested in the theme. And second, that great consultant who helped us actualize the incorporation of educational neuroscience is Dr. David Souza, our keynote speaker today. Dr. Souza is one of my heroes, and apparently not only mine, because he has been voted one of the top gurus in education. Dr. David Souza is an internationally recognized consultant in educational neuroscience and the author of more than 20 books that suggest ways educators, parents, and organizational leaders can translate current brain research into strategies for improving learning. A member of the Cognitive Neuroscience Society, he has conducted workshops in hundreds of school districts on brain research, instructional skills, and science education at pre-K, 12, and university levels. He's been with the School of Education more than 3 times to do workshops simply with our students, let alone with our faculty. He has made presentations to more than 200,000 educators at national conventions of education, of educational organizations, to regional and local school districts across the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, and Asia. Dr. Souza holds a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Bridgewater State University. I guess I spoke too long. That's the cue. Used to be a hook, right, in vaudeville. Here they just give you, okay. In any case, this is an amazing, talented, internationally recognized person who will share a fabulous workshop with you. Without any further ado, Dr. David Souza.
How's that now? There it is. Is it green? Very green. Okay, good. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I can't wait to meet me. Well, I'm delighted to be back here. When Dr. Neiman asked me to come and do this, I wondered how long it had been since I'd been working with this School of Education here. I thought it was about 5 years, but she reminded me, no, I started back in 2012. I checked my PowerPoint shows, and she was right. My first visit here was in February 2012. How time has gone by. Actually, I think I see a few faces here that may have been there at first. They're looking a little more experienced, of course. Well, also, when she asked me to come here, she said it's our Love, Grow, and Learn conference. So I'm wondering, which of those 3 did you have in mind for me? Since I'm not that great talking about love in this setting, or growing, but certainly learning. So I'm going to go that way. Is that okay? Good. I hope you all have a handout, because that's going to be critical for getting the most out of this. And do we have some more in case people don't? If you do, I would appreciate it, if you haven't already done so, to read the dear participants part of that so that you know what's coming in the next hour and a half. This is what we call an interactive session. We know an interactive. Hello up there? It's okay to talk to me. Hello? Yeah, okay. Do we know what interactive means? Yes. Okay, good. In fact, would you mind handing me that book for a moment? This is also available for those of you who have nothing else to read. Engaging the rewired brain. If there's anything we know, it's that the brain that does the work is the brain that learns. And in too many classrooms, the teachers are doing all the work, and that's why they know their stuff so well, and the students not so well. So we're going to try to model that and get you to participate. Now, we're kind of tight in here, but we'll do it. We'll have you getting up from time to time. The reason we do that is because if you sit for longer than 20 minutes, 30 minutes, your blood begins to pool. And it pools in two places, in your feet and in your seat. And blood that's pooled there isn't doing your brain any good. The brain is not a very efficient machine, actually. It requires, even though it's only 2% of your body weight, it takes up 20% of your calories. 2% of your body weight, but 20% of your calories, just to keep the brain functioning. So if you want to lose weight, think more. That'll work. Burn up some more calories. That's why we're going to get you up and talking to each other and sharing. Talking is a very powerful. I'm getting ahead of myself. So, we okay with that? We're going to be interactive? Yes. Hello? Yes. By the way, it'll make it go by faster. So, break will come sooner. All paparazzi are here already. Okay. So, let's get started here. I hope this will work. There we go. All right. So, first thing I want you to do, and please do it briefly, is we'd like you to make sure you know who's around you, because you're going to be talking to them. So please take a moment, say hello to the person to you, and find somebody who'll talk to you. To your left and right, just say hello. Who are you?
Get your the mic to make it loud.
Move this out of here. We'll use it for later. There's a seat here. All right. Earth to class. It's an expensive seat. It really costs a lot. All right, thank you. We're going to be doing a lot of interactive work, and so rather than my yelling at you, we'll use the hand technique. When I raise my hand, if you would do the same and bring your conversation to an end, we'll get along. I don't like shouting at people, and we'll move along. Better? Okay, you're used to that, I think. Okay, very good. So you've done the brief introductions. All right. Now, the next thing we want to make sure is that this section is interactive, which means you just don't sit there and fold your hand and say, this too shall pass. What we want you to do is learn. This is the love, grow, and learn concept. So how many of you came to learn today? About 6 of you. Great. For the rest of you, it's a mental health time. Okay, good. So we're going to get you up. Now, why do we get you up? I already mentioned about the blood flow when you get up. I'm going to also ask you to do some toe raises, since we usually have you walk around the room for 10 steps. But it's not possible to do here because we're kind of tight. So what I'll ask you to do is when we're going to share something, when you get up before you share, is you do 10 toe raises like this. Now, overachievers, you can do more, but no fewer. And the reason for that is that blood that's pooled between the feet and the seat, you've got 2 other blood pumps in your body. Those are your calf muscles. And so when you do that, you break up those pools, and in less than a minute, you've got 15% more blood flowing across your brain. Isn't that amazing? And that blood, hello, isn't that amazing? Yeah. And you've got more oxygen and more glucose, the fuel that the brain cells need. So if you're in a classroom, do that with your students. Do that if you're an executive here, administrator, and you have a meeting every 20 minutes or so, 20 to 30 minutes. Get people up and moving so that their brains are refreshed. Because you know, the longer you sit, you begin to fade because blood is draining out of your brain, and we don't want that to happen today. This is going to be too much fun. We hope. Okay, now the other thing is, we hope you're going to remember something that happened today, and talk is one of the most powerful memory devices there is. That's why teachers know their stuff so well, because they're always talking about it. But the kids don't do enough talking, or the learners, I should say. Don't do enough, whether you're adult or teenager or young kid. When you talk about what you're learning while you're learning, you are exciting some additional neural pathways in the brain, and your chances of remembering, you know that. If you want to remember someone's phone number, you say it out loud, 7 or 8 times. And at a party, that can be a bit loud. Anyway. So then the other thing is, come on, I can't get too far away. We think better on our feet than on our seat. That's why I'm going to ask you to exchange information while you're standing, okay? And the reason is because when you're standing, you force the heart to pump more blood, and that blood's carrying the precious oxygen and glucose that you need to think right. The frontal lobe, very inefficient. Takes a lot of energy to get it moving, but it can do marvelous things once it does get going, as we all know. And finally, this brings more fuel to the brain. I've already said that. All right, move along, David. Now, let me show you some evidence. You just don't have to believe me. Let's show you some brain scans. The first scan I'm going to show you is taken when a student is just listening to someone explain something to them. Now, it's taken, by the way, a long time to collect these scans. We started about 15 years ago now, because most of these scans were reserved for medical problems. And you couldn't get normal people in there to do scans to see what's happening in a typical brain. But we've been able to do that now and collect them. One thing I should tell you is you can't make any kind of a judgment based on one brain scan. So we often do what's called composite scans. What those are, and those of you, I see you nodding, you probably know about this. What we normally do is take anywhere from 20 to 30 scans, taken of 20 to 30 individuals, pretty much the same age, doing the same thing. And then what we do is we superimpose them upon one another, and because every brain is unique. And we remove the unique pieces and show the common areas. Because even though every brain is unique, there are a lot of things that are common. Most of us have our language centers on the left side of the brain. Most of us have our visual fields on the right side of the brain. Most of us do. Some people, it's the reverse, but it doesn't matter. They're still fine. They don't walk backwards or anything like that. You can't tell. So let's show you this. This is a PET scan of a student listening. And how we do these, by the way, is we wait for people who do need PET scans for a medical purpose that is not brain related. And since the dye stays in their body for about 5 hours, the educational researcher come out and say to the parent, can we borrow your kid? He's got to glow for another few hours. Can we borrow him and do something else? And they'll usually say yes. So that's why it's taken us so long to collect these. Anyway, this is what a brain looks like. By the way, the frontal lobe is to your left. All right, that's the frontal lobe is the thinking part of the brain. All right, just give it a little tap, by the way, because that's your precious part. Say, hello, frontal lobe. Come on, yeah. Give it a little whack, actually. That'll bring some blood. By the way, that's one way to get blood up there. Give it a whack. So as the kids come into classroom, give them a whack across the forehead. They'll be more alert. They will be more alert. The problem is some of them will whack back, and we don't like it. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Now, what are we showing here? Let me see if I get this right. If you look up here, this probably won't show on those screens, but I'm pointing to the frontal lobe here. You'll notice it's not very active. So this kid is listening to a teacher's lecture. Actually, it's an examiner there telling them something about typical high school things. And you notice this is the Broca's area and the auditory cortex. That's active because he's listening. But is he interested? Hello? No. How do you know he's not interested? Not much frontal lobe. When you're interested in something, your frontal lobe lights up. Whoa, hey, that's pretty good. If you're not interested, it looks like that. Now, what happens, though, if you say to that kid, look, we've given you a lesson here for about 10 minutes. What we'd like you to do now is think about it. prepare a little lesson in your head, and then we want you to talk back to, we're going to bring another kid in here, your age, you don't know him, and your job is to teach him what you just learned. You get the scenario? Hello? Yeah. Okay, so here's what, so what's happening now is the student is talking about explaining to another kid what he just learned recently from the examiner, all right? Now, he can't do walking. It'll be, in other words, what I'm going to show you is him sitting still in the scanner. He can't walk around with this, $2 billion thing running around. So it's still in the machine. But if he were walking, it'd be even more active than this is. Okay. Do you see a difference? That's what happens when you start talking about what you're learning. I'm not making this up. There's a proof right in front of you. Now, what do we have here? We have, first of all, the frontal lobe. Look how busy the frontal lobe is now. And of course, the auditory cortex, because he's listening to what he's presenting. The visual cortex is also excited here. He might be making visual images about how he's going to say something to this kid. Because remember, these kids want to talk to each other in kids' language so that they'll understand. And then this is the motor cortex here, so he might be half Italian, which means he's moving his hands to I can say that because I'm half Italian. Anyway, so you see the difference? This is what you want your kids' brains to look like if you're trying to teach them something. Or anybody on your staff, if you're trying to teach your department heads, if you're trying to teach your department heads something that they should be looking at and doing. This is what you want the brains to look at, not like this. And I used to teach chemistry. My first job was teaching chemistry. It was my bachelor's degree in chemistry. And I used to stand up and teach, chemistry, about the elements and all that. And I thought to myself, my God, that was my brain going crazy about chemistry. And this was the brain of the kids going, oh, God. Of course, when I taught chemistry, it was a little easier. We only had 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water. So it's a little simpler than it is today. All right. Okay, any comments on this? Questions? Yes, sir. About this? Yeah.
I totally agree with you.
Oh, good. All right. Next.
I know that I'm more stimulated when I'm walking around talking with my students when I take them out. I'm just an intern, but the nice student population.
You're not just an intern. You're an intern.
Okay.
That's an important step.
All right. And however, I'm in an extraordinarily well-funded public school. This is it's not Title I. This is not disadvantaged youth or anything. And even in this school, I cannot imagine, in my pre-calculus class, getting 32 students to walk around the room without being absolute chaos. So
Right.
what other things?
There's a typical reaction from a high school teacher who hasn't tried these things. They don't do it because they're afraid they're going to lose, what's the C word? Control.
Oh, I have no control.
Right. Maybe you should try gardening. You know what controls kids? 2 things. Number 1, a well-planned lesson.
Okay.
Nothing beats a well-planned lesson. And second, in making them feel that what they're going to learn is important to them. Not important to you, important to them. And if you can't do that, you got to work harder at it. Because I've been I used to live in New Jersey, Newark schools, very difficult schools. They're inner city, and I would walk in there and go into a high school, and I'd be in one classroom, and there'd be pandemonium. Kids are all talking, the teacher's trying to talk to them. I'd walk into another classroom, and there's learning going on. The kids were up, they were talking to each other, the teacher was walking around the room. And what's fascinating is the classroom that had chaos was being taught by a 6'2" male teacher who couldn't control them. And the one that was under control was a 5'7" woman who had the kids eating out of the palm of her hand. Why? Because she did the most important thing you can do in a learning experience, and is make the learning meaningful. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Meaning is the critical thing. You won't lose control if the kids think this is worth doing. They only go off task when they thought, what the hell are we here for? This is crazy. Then they'll go off task. I'm not saying it's easy. There's nothing about this profession that's easy. And if you came into it thinking that, I've been in it a long time, I can tell you it's not the case. But it can be very rewarding. And of course, make you very wealthy. So, what's the lesson here? Aim for more talk and walk. And by the way, everybody here has experienced this. You know, you're sitting down, I won't sit on your phone. I had the last one. You're sitting down trying to do your taxes or planning a lesson or balancing your checkbook and you're stuck. You say, I can't do this right now. And you get up and you go to the bathroom or you go to the refrigerator and then, oh yeah, that's it. The very act of getting up and walking opened up long-term storage sites. In fact, let me show you that. Most long-term storage sites, not all of them, most long-term storage sites are located right along here at the base of the brain of the cerebrum, just above the cerebellum. And the cerebellum has the parts of learned movement. You'll see that a little bit later. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but that's okay. No extra. The point is that the long-term storage sites are located so close to the cerebellum, the walking parts and moving parts, because that's how we survive as a species. Remember, a lot of these things were set in genetic code thousands of years ago. So the point is this: if you're, a cave person on the savannah and you're being chased by a hungry lion and you're running, you got to figure out how do I get away. The best way to do that is to think, what did I do the last time I was chased by a hungry lion? See, and that would be a long-term storage. So when you're moving, the synapses activate the long-term storage sites to try to find out how to save you. That's why getting up and walking gives you more access to things. I'll give you another little one. We'll never get through all my stuff because every time I do this, I keep thinking of another example. Sir, may I use you as my example? Yeah, big sitcom. Okay. You won't have to say anything except a little mumbling. All right. Let's say any of you have students who are a little slower at learning than others. Slow learners. Okay. I'm talking about the kids now, not the faculty. Yeah. Okay. Let's say, what's your first name? Manny. Okay. Let's say Manny here is having trouble, and I know he's not, doesn't acquire the learning as fast as some other kids do. So I need to give him some extra attention. Now, one thing I can do is just stand over and say, come on, do it again. Let's see you do it again. And by doing that raises his level of anxiety, right? His cortisol level goes up when the frontal lobe shuts down. And he'll do something just to get me out of there. But he's not learning anything. So a better way to do it, and this won't work with every kid, is what we call the touch, talk, and walk. Now, you have to be very careful how you touch kids these days, or anybody for that matter. But there are a couple of safe places. One is the shoulder, and the other is the elbow. And you choose which of those depending on how high the kid is compared to you. Now, he's about my height and maybe even taller, so I'm going to go with the elbow. So what we do is we say, okay, Manny, get your pencil and your writing instrument, and let's go for a walk. Okay. No, keep your stuff with you. Oh, because you're writing. So, all right, let's go for a walk. So notice I've got him here. And just tell me what's holding you up. Just go blah, 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 blah.
You can't seem to remember the material.
You can't even, okay, so what we do in this walk is I give him cues, not the answer, cues. First of all, a lot of these people are very kinesthetically sensitive, so the touch establishes a connection, as long as it's a reasonable touch. And then by walking, what I'm hoping will happen is, as I give him the cues, is that this will open up some long-term storage sites where he has the answer but hasn't been able to find it yet. And every now and then they'll do, oh yeah, now I see. All right? And then we've accomplished something, which is much better than me standing over him. Thank you, man. Okay. Right. Big hand for Manny. Okay. So that's something to try. Again, it won't always work with everybody. It'll work with girls just as well. And more with boys, because boys tend to be more kinesthetic sensitive than girls are, but that's just a generalization. Every kid's different. Yes, sir.
I have a question. I've heard some things that when students or even adults meditate and be sitting silent, it helps with brain development and even grows the brain and kind of gets
Because what that does is something different. Remember when I was saying, I'm standing over Manny and saying, come on, do it again. Let's get busy here. Or go over it again. Well, if he's going over it again, doing the same thing that he's done before, he's going to keep getting stuck, right? That's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. It doesn't work that way. So what the meditation does, and by the way, I do recommend it, especially in classrooms that have a lot of kids who are in trauma. And we'll talk about trauma. I hope to get to that before I'm done this morning. My standing over him raises his cortisol level because he's anxious. And when the cortisol level goes up, dopamine goes down, the frontal lobe shuts down from the learning and shifts to what is it I have to do to get this guy away from me, to calm me down. Because the body doesn't like to be under stress. So it tries to find a way to alleviate that. So a lot of kids come to school already stressed, because they have problems at home, they have domestic violence, or they have drugs, or a sibling, or someone is bullying on them, and they come already stressed. That means their cortisol levels are already pretty high. You're going to have a tough time getting their attention. I'm going to talk to you today about, pre-calculus, and they're going to say, I'm sorry, I've got to deal with this guy that keeps beating up on me. So what the meditation does is allow time for the cortisol level to go down and for the dopamine level to come back up. And that then allows you to do other things. Can I answer your question? Okay. All right, let's move on. So here's the mantra. Sousa's mantra for the last 25 years is the brain that does the work is the brain that learns. And so we want your brain to be doing the work today, not just mine. Okay. Now, you all know about educational neuroscience, a new area of scientific inquiry that grew up about 15 years ago, started in England, actually. So it's sometimes called mind, brain, and education in honor of the British, who were really the ones who moved this along. But we needed a more accurate term for it, and I was part of a committee about 7 or 8 years ago called the Delphi Committee of about 25 of us all over the world who exchanged emails and tried to come up with another name for this new area of inquiry. So what it is the intersection of psychology, we're learning from cognitive psychology, from neuroscience discoveries, and pedagogy, that is the act of implementing what you learn in a classroom. Okay. Now, what are some of our main premises for today's presentation? Number one, the educational neuroscience data are revealing new insights about how the brain learns. Secondly, these insights have implications for what we do in schools and classrooms. And by the way, I want you to realize I'm talking about learners of all ages. Obviously, there are age differences, but the human brain, regardless of whether you're 1 year old or 75 years old, learns in pretty much the same way. It's just that there's different influences depending on. Obviously, the older you are, the more that past experience influences what you're learning. When you're very young, kids are like sponges because they don't have past experience to interfere with their learning. As we get older, often our past experience interfere. Oh, I already know that, or that doesn't interest me. So those things get in the way. And finally, that technology is changing our brains. That's why I hope none of you will go into shock as a result of having turned off your cell phone for the next hour and a half. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. I've been studying that was what prompted me to write this book and this book now is 2 years old. I still stay with the research. It is frightening. The amount of time the kids are spending on screens and on social media, and by the way, I do not call it social media, I call it anti-social media, because it does not promote social skills at all. If anything, it damages them or retards them as far as I'm concerned. But that's my opinion. I'll always try to separate opinion from the science. But the science of it is very disturbing, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. And if I don't have time to get to it, this book will certainly raise your awareness about how things are going. And whatever you read in there, I won't say it's worse, but it's more concerning than that already as we get more data over the next couple of years. And of course, it's creeping up the age bracket. Some of you here are probably in bad shape if we took your phone away for a day or two. Some people actually have psychological traumatic effects you do that. Kids, especially teenagers. It's like he's cutting my world out. Should not be, well, that should not be your world. Your world should be the people around you, the people you interact with, the people you love you and you love back, and that should be your world. The device should be ancillary to that, not it. Again, my opinion. Okay, move along. The newborn brain is pre-wired. As a result of developing all these thousands of years as a species, our genetic code has realized that certain characteristics, certain skills will help keep us alive, because that's the brain's main job. Brain has two main jobs. Brain's number one main job is to keep you alive. Its second main job is to have you meet someone of the opposite sex so that you can procreate the species, make more brains. Okay? That's its main. So it's really just that. Survival and sex. That's what the brain is designed mainly for. And if you've got a teenager at home, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so let's look at the parts of the brain that are pre-wired. You can't learn anything by and large. There's always exceptions, unless you focus on it. All right, so the frontal lobe has developed attention systems whose job it is to focus. Why? Because in order to keep you alive, my brain has to keep monitoring my environment for threats. Now, we don't have as many threats, I should say we don't have as many threats in schools, but that's changed, obviously, unfortunately. But in the savannah, where we developed as a species, there were a lot of threats. So you had to be on alert all the time for potential threats. Okay. Then we also found out as a species that by talking to one another the way other animals do, we're more likely to survive than by not. By warning each other of impending danger, or by finding food, or finding a mate, whatever, talking. So we developed two areas for language acquisition, both for most people on the left side of the brain. One is called Broca's area, discovered by Paul Broca, a physician, a French physician in the 1860s, who knows that when people struck to the left side of the head, they couldn't speak for a while until it healed. So he said there must be a language area here, and it was named in honor of him. Then, about 20 years later, in 1880, a German physician by the name of Karl Wernicke discovered that people who were struck just behind here, again on the left side, they could speak, but they didn't make sense. You probably know people like that now. So these are the two language centers that have developed over thousands and thousands of years. Now, what happens shortly after birth is that as the young brain is listening to sounds around it, it's trying to separate native language that the caregiver is talking from background noise. In order to do that, these two make connections with each other. So they start talking to each other, Broca and Wernicke. And so Broca has the vocabulary, as we'll see a bit later on, and Wernicke has the meaning. We'll get into that in a little more detail in just a few minutes. I just want to show you the pre-wired. So those are the areas of pre-wired. And most people on the left side, Broca is right behind your temple, right behind your left temple, and right above your left ear is Wernicke's. Okay, now, what else? Motor cortex, right across the middle. This is immediate movements. We have two areas of motor control, one for immediate movements, one for learned movements. So if I'm going to go over and shake this nice lady's hand, that's immediate movement. That's the frontal lobe here. But if I'm going to get in my car and drive, that's learned motion. That's cerebellum. We'll come to that in a moment. Okay. So, what else? Yeah. We have neurons that focus on social interaction. Why? What did I say was the second reason for the brain? Huh? Oh, you're shortening it, huh? It's supposed to be prolongation of the species, propagation of the species. I heard just a three-letter word. I don't know about you. That's okay. We'll accept that. That's scientific enough. Right. Okay. Yeah. And in order to do that, you have to usually interact with a member of the opposite sex so that you agree emotionally that this might work. And so we do have these neurons discovered in 1930 by a Serbian physician by the name of Konstantin Vanitamo. And he was doing anatomy of the brain, and he found these neurons located right between the frontal lobe, which is here, and the emotional system, which is here. They're right between them. So he thought, what do these things do? He knew they must have a special function because they were different in shape from the other neurons around it. And if function follows form, there must be a reason why they were shaped different. But then he couldn't figure it out, and unfortunately he got killed in World War II, so that research came to an end, and it wasn't touched again until 1998, 99, when anatomists went back and said, what are these von Economo neurons all about? They discovered them in apes, and apes are social animals. And they found out, they did brain scans on apes, believe it or not, and they found out whenever they were interacting socially, those von Economo neurons lit up, those neurons in that area. And so more research shows us now we do have a whole set of neurons between they're sometimes called mirror neurons. You may have heard mirror neurons. Yes. These are also sometimes called the empathy neurons because they're between the regional part of the brain and the emotional part of the brain. And to give you an example, what's your name, sir? Nico. Nico. Hi, Nico. Nice to meet you. If I walked up to Nico, I don't know him very well. We start chatting, and I'm looking at his expression. We know we're face to face. We're not using devices. We're doing this in the real world. And I say something, and all of a sudden his expression goes like that. That tells me I said something that either was offensive or he didn't like or didn't believe in and really didn't believe it. What happens then is the von Economo neurons pipe up. And they say, they're trying to work between the emotional reaction I got and my rational, what do I do about this? And so I begin, I'm sorry, did I say something that bothered you? And then I try to make up for it. Those are called the empathy neurons, von Economo neurons. So they're there. And that tells us then that we have a whole part of the brain dedicated just to social interactions. Okay. And by the way, that's how babies, the other way we discover them in apes is that they will light up. For example, this guy just took a drink out of, just had some of his vodka and tonic, and his brain lit up, certain areas lit up in order to allow him to do that. By the way, I was watching him, the same areas in my brain that would do that lit up as his. In other words, these mirror, that's why they call them mirror neurons. They not only light up when you perform the act, they light up when you see someone else performing the act. No, thanks. Maybe a little bit later, see how the crowd goes. So these are the empathy, and that's how kids learn language. Because remember, 70% of language acquisition is nonverbal. Language acquisition and understanding, comprehension. You're watching someone, the baby is watching you as, we'll come to that in a moment, as you are saying things and watching your expression. Okay, move on, David. Now we discovered there's a math area in the brain. Did you know that? Hello? No, so he didn't, yeah. And so don't tell me I can't do math, because there's a part of your brain that's designed for that. And we'll get into that a little bit later on also. And then finally, here's the cerebellum. Cerebellum is learned movements. When you learn something new that's physical, the frontal lobe and the motor cortex up here are very much involved. First time you're driving a car, first time you're riding a bicycle, first time you're playing the piano, a particular song. But as you practice that over and over, the busy part of the brain says, well, look, if this is going to be that repetitive, I'm not going to take up room here. Let's move it to the other part of the brain, whose job it is to remember learned movements. And that's why how you drive a car, how you ride a bicycle, how you play your sport well, how you play the piano, how you tie a shoelace, those are all stored in the cerebellum. That's why you can do two things at once. Now, important to remember, the brain can do two things at once as long as the different parts of the brain doing it. That's why you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Because walking is the cerebellum, chewing gum is the motor cortex up here, and so you have different parts of the brain doing it. But when things get into the cerebellum, you can do them almost automatically. You don't even know you're doing them. I mean, don't some of you have the experience? You drive here to work and say, how the hell did I get here? You remember, and did I stop at that stop sign back there? Because your frontal lobe was processing your day, but the cerebellum's driving the car. And you keep wondering, how did I get here? What was that thump I heard a little while ago? That kind of stuff. So that can happen. Yes, ma'am?
If you're a person that chews gum every day consistently, doesn't that become a learned movement?
No.
No?
No. It's not a critical movement. It's not critical for your survival or something you're going to do repetitively for a survival reason. It's just, and by the way, something that's so simple, cerebellum doesn't want something simple. No. The motor cortex can handle it, like walking over and shaking someone's hand. Yes, sir.
The map area, is that located in what lobe is that? Temporal or parietal?
That's the parietal.
Parietal?
That's the parietal lobe right here. Yeah, parietal lobe, right here. Yeah. Top of the parietal.
Yeah, first I heard of it, so I didn't know what lobe they located that in.
Yeah, it's the parietal. Again, fairly recently discovered. I'd say, let's see, it was Stanislaus Dehaene discovered that. College of London, of Paris, maybe 93, around that, early 90s. All right, anything else? Ready to move along? Okay, turn to the person next to you and tell them what a good time you're having so far. We'll get you up in a moment. Yeah, you know what? They've been sitting a while. Everybody up. Everybody up. All right, do your 10 toe raises. Do your 10 toe raises. Okay, come on back, please. Now, I recognize that when you get up that way, it sometimes stimulates the bladder, and we're not taking a break yet for a while, so you're all adults. If you need to get up and get some coffee, because you're afraid you might fall asleep in my presentation, or you need to use the restroom, just get up and do it, okay? Just as long as you don't say, hey, I'm going to the bathroom. Okay, moving along. Now, let's first talk about language acquisition, especially in areas like this where you have bilingual possibilities. Broca's area and Wernicke's area we talked about are the language centers of the brain. This does not mean that other parts of the brain aren't recruited during language understanding, but those are the main centers of language acquisition. Oh, what happened? Sorry about that. Broca's area, three major things happen there. Vocabulary, syntax, remember syntax is organization, sequence of words in a sentence, and grammar, rules of grammar. Those are generally the responsibility, notice there are always exceptions, but those are generally the responsibility of Broca's area, those three things. Vocabulary acquisition, the syntax, and grammar. Wernicke is mainly responsible for sense and meaning, so comprehension. And that's why it's important for these two to talk to one another. Because acquiring vocabulary isn't much value if you don't know what the words mean. So these two have to start talking to one another, and that's why some kids, very young kids, can say words, but they have no clue what they mean. Because Wernicke's hasn't been activated yet, and or not sufficiently activated to attach meaning. That's why it's very important for parents of young toddlers to talk to them and explain the words they're using, so that the kid not only acquires the word, but acquires the meaning of the word. Don't get ahead of something. I know what's coming, so you have to be careful not to. Now, vocabulary is storage areas developed on both sides of the brain. When Broca is very clever, a sight. After a while, when talking to Wernicke, they begin to recognize that certain words have similar relationship to each other, like screwdriver, hammer, carpet the square, nail, screw. They begin to recognize that that's part of a collective group that has similar functions. And cleverly enough, the brain sets aside storage areas by category. Now, this is, of course, in the later brain. We're not talking about kids. We're talking about later teenagers and adults. So there are, when we do scans of brain with vocabulary, we find that certain words that are similar to one another in terms of their comprehension flash in the same area. It's amazing how that happens, but that's part of the efficiency of the brain. Okay, that could be a whole nother lecture. Anyway, how kids acquire language, of course, is they begin to imitate the sounds and expressions of their parent or caregiver. And face-to-face interaction is very important, not television. Face-to-face interaction, because I said before, 70% of communication is nonverbal. And so the baby is not just, that kid's brain is not just listening to the sound, but they're also watching your expression. Do you smile when you say that word? Do you frown when you say that word? Do you wrinkle your forehead? Do you use it in what we call parent ease, that sing-songy? And by the way, this is in every culture in the world. I was going to say universe. Sorry about that. My astronomy is getting carried. Under every culture, parents go, "Oh, how are you? How cute. Aren't you so sweet today? Huh? Oh, you look more like me than your father." Those kind of, that sing-songy thing exists in every culture. And that sing-songy is built into the parent. And the purpose of that is to help the kid's brain separate sounds of language from background noise. And it can be pretty good at that.
I have a question, Doctor. Question.
Yes, sir.
I want to know, how does a child whose original language or the parents are English, Spanish based, when they go to school, which is English based, so they learn English in school at an early age, and then when they go home, it's Spanish.
Yeah.
How do they?
All right, let me see if this is, hang on a moment. I'm going to come, you're getting ahead of me, but I will answer that. Don't let me get away without answering that question. Let me, just warning about toddlers and television. A lot of research on this, American Pediatric Association. Look at the latest, one of these research studies is just amazing. So this is a group of over 100 toddlers who were watching television for 1 hour a day or more. Under the 2 years of age or younger. And they were using it because the parent thought this is a good babysitter. I'll have the kid in front of the television while I go iron clothes or do the wash or make dinner, whatever. So it's a nice babysitter. What happens, though, is that television doesn't talk the way parent ease talks. And so the baby's brain has a very difficult time trying to identify syllables and separate them out. And as a result of that, what this resulted in was an 18 to 24 months delay in language development. That's outrageous. The kid's only 2 years old, and already he's going to be a year and a half or 2 years behind, because if the television becomes the main source of language acquisition. And here's the worst part. The more they watched the TV, the longer the delay. So kids who were there for several hours, the delay was even longer. Now, it's not permanent. Obviously, it can be moderated, it can be addressed, it can be corrected. But why? Why do that? If you, what we say to parents is, look, don't put the kid in front of us. You're going to do ironing? Put the kid on the floor next to you and tell them what you're doing. What do you think I'm doing here? Why am I doing this? Is called an iron. You know what an iron does? It gets all those wrinkles out of your onesies. Isn't that one? That kind. I'm serious. That kind of discussion and force the kid to talk back to you. What did I say this was? So there's a face-to-face conversation. The kid not only learns the word, but is able to connect the word to its meaning, what it does, and that will help with language development. Not the television. And not even Einstein, all that other crap. Oh yeah, what about this verb? No. Face-to-face interaction. Okay. By the way, most of the sources that are used here are in the back of your handout. I'm not sure I got all of them, but I think I got most of them on there. Related to this? Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, is that because those households also tend to use less interaction, verbal interaction? Is it a high verbal interaction household with TV, or is it a low verbal interaction household and TV is in place of that verbal interaction?
Many of these,
Like it's a negative effect. Does it take away from high verbal interaction households?
yeah, no, most of these were not high verbal interaction households. In fact, often single-parent households.
It's not necessarily the TV per se, it's the TV as a replacement for human interaction.
That's correct. Well, the TV, no, it's also the TV, because the TV doesn't replicate parentese.
I think what he's saying is if they had the parentheses and the TV, it wouldn't be as much of a problem for the TV potentially, right?
Yeah, well, I'm saying no TV, period. Why take the risk?
Yeah, I was just getting to his
Yeah.
point. I think it's a good question here, he's asking about that.
Yeah. Why take the risk? Just, yes.
If you watch TV with your child, is it as
All right, I'll say it one more time. No TV for toddlers under the age of 2. Punkt. Exclamation point. That's what the science is saying. Now, what do you want to do? You want to watch it with the kid sitting on your head or whatever? Fine, but there's always, why take the risk? Why take the risk? And by the way, there are other things to be gained by your interacting with your child. We're never going to get through this. All right, again, here's some interesting, just some brain scans to show you that language is essentially a left hemisphere operation. It was only about 10 years ago they were able to do studies on what we call myelation. Do you know what myelation is? As the baby's brain, by the way, is born with 200 billion neurons, but the adult brain has only 100 billion, but it's bigger. How's that? How could the baby's brain have twice as many neurons and only be this big, and we have a larger brain but fewer neurons? How does that work?
Pruning occurs around 7 years old to increase efficiency.
Well, pruning. Yeah, well, how does the brain know which to prune? As you use the neurons, the more you use them, the more they need to be protected. So what happens is something called lipoproteins, which come from fat. And by the way, that's why you should never feed a toddler skim milk. They need the fat from the milk in order to make lipoproteins. We've had kids come into the emergency room with severe brain trauma because they only fed them, oh, I'm trying to help my kid, no fat. No, they need the fat at that age. That's why mother's milk is very rich in fat, because they need the lipo means fat. Protein means protein. So they're a protein molecule and a fat molecule combined. They form around the neurons that are being activated, and that substance is called myelin. And the more the neuron pathway is activated, the more myelin that's formed around it. So the reason your brain has half the neurons is because the brain over time does something called apoptosis. Apoptosis is pruning. So think of a farmer who throws seed into the ground and waits until the seedling comes up. And after a while he goes through and he pulls out the weak ones so that the stronger ones can survive. That's what happens in your brain. Your brain kills off by apoptosis those neurons that aren't being used and strengthens the ones that are being used through additional myelation. So the reason your brain is larger, even though it has fewer neurons, is because you have a lot of fat in there. So we're all fatheads from that standpoint. Literally fatheads. So if someone calls you that, say thank you. That shows you how smart I am. And they'll be, what? Okay, moving right along. Now, let's get back to this Ezekiel there. There he is. Yeah, this gentleman's question about language acquisition. One thing about brokers and Wernicke's, remember they were established thousands and thousands of years ago when our average lifespan was about 18 years, 18 to 20 years. By then you died either of disease or you had some animal's lunch or another tribe came and killed you off so you could run off with your mate, whatever the reason is. Average lifespan, 18 to 20. So it was reasonable to assume that by the time you were 5, 6, or 7, you had acquired all the limited vocabulary you needed to survive on the savannah. So brokers and Wernicke's still have that genetic time machine in them, that they tend to shut off around the ages of 5, 6, and 7, depending on the individual, usually a little earlier in boys, a little later in girls. And after that, acquiring another language becomes more difficult because Broca's and Wernicke's doesn't want anything to do with it. So if you go back to this gentleman's question here about bilingualism, if you want a kid to learn 2 languages, the earlier you start, the better. So this notion in public schools that we'll start teaching a second language in middle school is ridiculous because you've lost all that valuable time. If you want a kid to learn another language, you start in the primary grades. You want to get to that before the Broca's and Wernicke's close off. Now this raises another question. I'll deal with it before you ask it. You mean I can't learn another language as I get older? Of course not. What it means is it gets more difficult because Broca's and Wernicke's, which are designed for language acquisition, aren't going to help you. So it goes to another part of the brain. Generally in the rear right, we don't know why, but when we do scans of people who've learned a second language later in life, it goes to the rear right side of the brain for reasons unknown to us. It doesn't matter. But they can still become pretty proficient in it, but it's a lot more effort to do that. That's why kids who grow up in bilingual homes, where they started learning both Spanish, whatever the other language is, and English at the same time, they can move back and forth. And because of something called prosody, some of you nodding, you know what prosody is. Prosody is the sum description of the characteristics of a language. We have about just under 7,000 languages spoken on this planet, not counting dialects. Each one of those has its own prosody. What is prosody? Prosody is the beat of the language, the sequence of consonants and vowels, the tonality of the language, like Asian languages are very tonal. They get meaning from tone, not from word. The word ma in Chinese has about 5 different meanings, depending on how you say it. Ma, ma. So it's very tonal. Okay. My point is that the brain separates Spanish or from English or whatever the other language is by its prosody. And those 2 languages have the same prosody. Dialects do. It can be very close, but not separate languages. So that's how it does itself. I answer your question?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Now, so I'm not discouraging learning a language at any time in your life. I'm just saying recognize 2 things. Number one, it will require a little more effort, and the older you are, the more effort it will require. And secondly, there's always the risk that your native language will interfere with the acquisition of the new language, especially if the language is similar in structure, where there can be, I found out a long time ago that embarazada does not mean embarrassed in English. It just sounded so logical until I found out its real meaning. I guess most of you know its real meaning. Means pregnant. And I said, oh, I was embarazada about that. I'm so sorry. Why those quizzical looks on your faces like that? Yes, sir.
Just a comment about that, about language acquisition early on. When I was finishing my bachelor's degree, there was a group of students from Curaçao, and they speak 5 languages. Papiamento, Dutch, English, French, and Spanish. But it's a public policy that they teach those languages early on.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the folks went to the
Netherlands, same thing. The Dutch are very smart. They know no one's going to learn Dutch unless you marry one, and you have to. Although sometimes even that, better off not learning the language. So they, in addition to Dutch, they learn English, they learn French, they learn German, and then they have a choice of a 5th one. It can be Italian or Spanish, whatever. And all starts in the preschool. So and you can learn 5, 6, 7 languages. Again, prosody, the brain is very good at that. Broca's and Wernicke's are masters at being able to separate languages by prosody. It just has to come early. Yes, sir?
I want to go back to the previous slide in reference to plaque and myelination. Is there any correlation between later in life, what we see in terms of Alzheimer's disease and the attributing to it having to do with pinnatomes in the myelination process? The question is, what if, are there any studies looking at later diet later in
You know, the mechanism for Alzheimer's is still difficult to pinpoint. We thought we had it done with the beta amyloids. That was the answer, we thought 10 years ago. And then we developed a vaccine for that and realized it didn't work. It's not just the beta amyloids. It's other factors that we haven't found out yet that interfere with it. Now, Alzheimer's, there's senile Alzheimer's and there's early onset. Early onset is a genetic, it's what we call a clock gene set. We have several clock gene sets in our body. One of them is early onset Alzheimer's, which can begin in the 20s, people in the 20s or early 30s. But the regular, or the senile onset of Alzheimer's is this accumulation of proteins around the neurons that kind of strangle them. I don't know of any dietary connections yet, although they do say as you get older you should reduce fat for a couple of reasons. Number one, because of accumulation in the bloodstream, but also we've discovered, have you heard of, let me back up a moment. When I took biology in high school 1,000 years ago, we were taught that the brain was the only organ that did not replenish itself, right? You get a new bladder every 7 days. Did you know that? New bladder lining every 7 days. You get a new skin every 27 days. Sometimes it comes back a little more wrinkled than flat. But you get a new skin every 27 days. So you're constantly changing your cells except the brain. That's what we were taught. Well, of course, in 1998, we found out from research at the University of California, San Diego, something called neurogenesis. The brain does make new cells. It makes them, by the way, in the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain responsible for memory. It kind of makes sense what happened there. Now, since that was discovered, whatever that is, almost 20 years ago now, right? Or over 20, whatever it is, square root of one. Anyway, whatever it is, we've been trying to find out what encourages neurogenesis, because this can make up for the neurons you lose at night. Because remember, every time you go to bed, you lose about 500 to 600 neurons every night that you die. But you started off with 100 billion as an adult, so it's going to take a while to lose them. And this notion, by the way, that every drink of alcohol you have kills off a couple hundred neurons, they're going to die whether you drink or not. So you may I am just stating scientific fact. What you do with it is up to you. I am not, encouraging. So since then, they've been looking for what kinds of things encourage neurogenesis. And one of the things that encourages it is low fat diet, exercise, and low sugar. Those are the only three things they've discovered so far. But they're trying to work hard to find out what encourages neurogenesis to try to make up the neurons you lose at night. Okay, I'll never get through this. Go ahead.
One quick comment. There's some new studies coming out of the University of South Florida that are looking at ketogenic diet to Alzheimer's disease and seizures. They've shown that by having a ketogenic diet, which is high in fat, no carbs, no sugar, it is decreasing or helping to postpone the signs of Alzheimer's.
Well, I'd like to see that study. Yeah. You just have to be so careful. We had so many what we thought were answers to Alzheimer's, only to find out that it was either it wasn't causation. Sometimes it's not correlation is not the same as causation, as you well know. So anyway, okay, let's move along. Now, so kids will say, you never hear kids say, "I can't do language." They don't say that, but they will say, "I can't do math." I can't do math. And I've had parents tell me, well, my kid, I wasn't very good at math, so my kid's not going to be very good at math. There's no special math gene. There is an area of the brain that's reserved for arithmetic calculations. Why? Because it kept you alive. The brain wouldn't have it unless it was a survival strategy. Now, let me give you an example. This part of the, come on, both of these are innate capabilities. So saying I can't do math doesn't make sense unless, there's a pathological problem with you. I'm going to get over here because these poor people over here never get to see me. Wake up. I'm over here now. These are both innate capabilities. So if you can do language, you can do math. The problem is how we teach it. All right, learning mathematics. This is, every one of these things I'm talking about could be a separate whole day thing. I'm just trying to raise your level of awareness about it. We're born with something called number sense. Number sense is an innate capability. We're born with it. It consists of two things. It consists of something called subitizing. Subitizing is your ability to know how many objects are in a small group without counting. Because when you're on the savannah trying to survive, you didn't have time to say, okay, if you want to get want to kill one of those elands over there, but there's a group of lions over there. 1, 2, 3. We didn't have a counting system. So what you had to do is make a decision whether that group was going to be a danger to you as you try to get one of the members of this group. Got it? Understand? So that's subitizing. Then, if a couple of the lions went away, that should improve your chances. So we have this other capability known as numerosity. And numerosity, thank you, is knowing whether something has been added or removed, whether another lion showed up or whether one left, again, without counting. So these were survival techniques. Because when you went out hunting, the numbers of prey and the numbers of predators mattered, or you didn't get back home. And by the way, another reason why men are not very good at language is because when you went out hunting, you had to be quiet. Chatty hunters for lunch. So let's give an example. You ready, everybody? Look at the screen. Screen? Am I in the way? Sorry. Okay. I want to show. This is proof that parts of the brain actually are activated during number processing. This is simple number processing. Okay, frontal lobe, all right, now here we go. What I'm going to do now, come on, too far away. Now, what's numerosity? Numerosity is the ability to determine if an object has been added or removed from a collection without counting. Now you need to look at the screen, and I'm going to ask you a question after you see what happens on the screen. The question will be, how many objects did you see? Are you ready? Everyone found the screen to look at? Yeah. Here we go. How many objects did you see? 5. Anybody here go? Just a minute. 1, 2, 3. You did it right away. That's the number sense we're talking about. How about here? That's knowing that an object has been removed without counting it. So those were critical things for survival. And that is the beginning of the part of the brain that began to do number processing. And once we recognize that, as we get more advanced species, with the Phoenicians and the Babylonians, who recognized you could start a number system because it was important to know how many crops you needed for this population, again, survival strategy, then math and the ability to manipulate numbers became critical for survival, and so the math area expanded. There's a wonderful book by Stanislaus Dehaene called Number Sense, which explains this whole development. So any of you who work with math or teach math, even elementary teachers who often teach math, but this is worth knowing because what we find out here is kids will learn math faster if they understand the process. They understand the theory before the process. We often teach them the procedure. This is what multiplication is, addition is. We never tell them that multiplication is just successive addition, subtraction, division is successive subtraction. They never learn the system. They just learn the procedure. All right. Now, something else we've learned. Why do kids have dyscalculia? That's the disorder in which they have trouble with numbers. And we found out that actually it takes 3 different cerebral systems to process math, to have arithmetic processing. One of them, first of all, we develop a symbol for that, and so we have symbol processing. Now, there's a part of the brain we'll talk about in a moment. Symbol processing, that we use a symbol to represent a collection of objects. Now, right here in the brain, right about here, if you go on the left side again, just a little bit to the left at the top, right about here. Just press that little part right there. Yeah, do you see numbers? No, well, you should. That's the angular gyrus. Now, what's the angular gyrus? Angular gyrus wasn't developed to look at numbers. It was developed to help the brain translate a shape into meaning. So that, again, back in the savannah, we could tell by shape which was prey and which was predator. And if you got those wrong, again, problems, all right? So the angular gyrus helps us to tell the meaning of a shape. Now let me give you an example. You're driving down a dark road, and you look ahead and you can see an octagonal plate attached to a vertical post. Now you can't read it, you just see it in the distance. What does your brain tell you?
Turn your lights on.
When you get there. Okay, you're going to have to stay a little longer. We need more work. Thank you. Love the humor. Where was I? Somewhere on a dark road. Dark road. Yeah, it means it's your brain saying, "Oh, when I get there, I'm supposed to stop." It's actually a command, not a suggestion. But if you drive in Europe, you know it's all just suggestions. Or someplace around Miami, I found out last night. Okay, so that's the angular gyrus.
Is the angular gyrus on the occipital lobe? Visual processing, or no, that's
The angular gyrus is on the parietal lobe, just below, about 2
even
inches.
though it's involved in visual processing, it's found in the parietal lobe.
Yeah, well, but as you can see, it's very close. It probably does recruit some of the visual cortex, because you see, here's the front of the brain, here's the visual cortex,
Right.
here it is here. So I would say yes, it does recruit visual cortex pathways. Okay. Next is visual processing. So in addition to having a symbol to represent, say, 3, we also know what 3 objects look like, or how many objects have to be there to say that's 3. And then finally, we develop a word to say it. So we have symbolic processing, we have visual processing, and we have language processing. So sometimes kids are not that good at math because they have language problems. So those have to be addressed first in order to help make this triad work. Now, not all. I mean, there's some who learn to cope with that. Or if they have vision problems, it's not that they can't do math, it's that they're seeing a 3 as an 8 or the 6 as a 9 or something is not working right. So we have to be careful not to jump to conclusions that because they can't do math, they don't have the math gene, which doesn't exist, by the way, it's a genetic set. We have to say, hey, wait a minute, there are 2 other things involved here, language and vision. Do they be the potential problem? Again, we can spend a lot of time with that. Also, the brain uses different parts of itself between exact calculations and estimates. One thing we find kids are very bad at is estimation. And the reason they're bad at it is we don't teach it. And most decisions you make in life regarding measurements are estimates. They're not exact, precise. Now, if you're going to have flooring done in your house, you want a pretty precise measurement. You can't say, well, it's about 100 square feet. No, you have to be precise. But not all measurements are precise. And fewer are precise than not. So what's interesting is exact calculations. Look at the input from Broca's area here in exact calculation. Because the words that you use to describe the calculation have to be exact. And then, but with approximate calculations, you're using visual spatial. So if you say to me, David, how big do you think this room is? Well, my first question, you want feet or meters? You never know what you want. And then I'll look, I'll say, well, it's approximately, I'll make a judgment. That's visual processing. If I'm going to measure it out precisely, that would be language processing. You with me? Okay, so different parts of the brain do different things. We need to work harder at estimation. All right. Okay, talk about reading in a moment. You got your hand out there? Okay, good. It's coming to it. I want to give you a chance to get up and move again. Quickly go through reading. We could spend 2 days on this alone. This is, when people say to me, what's the one area that neuroscience has contributed the most to? it's reading. We learned a lot about what was so-called dyslexia that isn't. For example, that it's not a visual process problem, it's an auditory problem. Those who work in that area know what I'm talking about. So, the brain has no specialized areas for reading. Why? It's not essential for survival. Now, we may think it is now, but then, when these codes were put in place, reading was not essential for survival. So, we have no specialized. As a result, the brain has to recruit certain areas in order to do this. And different areas of the brain in order to carry out the ability to read. And it is, what you have to understand, is reading is the most difficult cerebral process we ask the young brain to do. It is not easy, and most of you don't remember what a tough time you had learning to read. Most of us do have a tough time. But we don't remember it. We remember the success. Now, so of all the studies that have been done now, we have a pretty good idea of how the brain learns to read. It recruits, first of all, you need Broca's area, you need Wernicke's area. They're talking to one another. You need a visual cortex in order to see it. And the angular gyrus comes in play here. What the angular gyrus does is help the brain change the shape, identify a sound that goes with the letter. Now, just let me do this very quickly. Why is reading so difficult? Think of what you say to the kid. You say to the kids, boys and girls. Now remember, girls are better at language than boys, generally speaking, in a young age. Why? Because boys had to be quiet when they went out hunting, and girls had to be able to talk to the kids and give them stories. So they developed language skills. Boys developed visual, spatial, and temporal skills. Got it? Okay. So what happens now is we say to these kids, boys and girls, you know those sounds you've been playing with in your head, the language, over the last couple of years? You've been talking about, you know those sounds? Guess what? We have developed some symbols to represent those sounds. Now, the symbols don't exist in the real world. We made them up. And that's kind of fun, don't you think? And of course, the boys are going, oh. The girls say, oh, yeah, that's fun. And there's one little problem. Our language has 54 sounds. We call them phonemes. But we only have 26 symbols called the alphabet, the graphemes. So, because we have more sounds than we have symbols, in some cases, the same symbol will have different sounds, and the same sounds will have different symbols. Isn't that fun? And the girls are saying, yeah, I can't wait to try that. And the boys are saying, what the hell did I get myself into? That's right. All right. So, it ain't easy. Now, most brains, when they're learning a language, go through 3 phases. We'll do this quickly, and then we'll give you a chance to get up and chat. Over time, what happens as you begin to read is this process becomes very fast. Fluency takes over. In other words, what the brain has to do, and remember the 5 steps, it has to recognize the word, it has to recognize its meaning, it has to be able to translate the letters to sound, phonics, and then it has to comprehend it, and then over time, you want to do it pretty quickly, fluency. Right? Over time, what happens is this process gets shortcut. So when I see the word boy, I know right away what it means. I don't have to say B-O-Y. Okay, I got that. That means a young male. Okay, I got it. That happens very fast. And that happens fast because of a new part of the brain that's developed called the word form area. And the word form area is the speedy part of the brain. Now, some kids have a default in the angular gyrus. Either there's a stroke, mini stroke that occurred, or some developmental problem happened, and so they can't do that very well. Now, very labor intensive. Now, what are the 3 phases? The first phase is being able to recognize the alphabet and the shape of the letters. We call that the pictorial stage. The brain has to say, this letter, these are the different letters. Secondly, so it looks at that and says, okay, A is different from B, different from C, different from D, and so on. Then the next thing it has to do is pronounce the letters. B, A, B, Realizing, of course, later on, that some letters can be pronounced different ways, depending how they're used in a word. This is called the phonological stage. The person to be able to see it and hear it, and then be able to recognize the words quickly, fluency. And that's called the orthographic stage. When they look at the word, they know the meaning right away. This takes time, it takes practice, and there are lots of things that can go wrong. Here's a scan of the brain while reading. There's the word form area right there. This is from the angulate gyrus. It uses the angulate gyrus, and it uses its position, uses the angulate gyrus, which is here. It uses, of course, recruits members of the auditory cortex, because it has to hear it, and it recruits members of the visual cortex, because it has to see it. That's how difficult it is to read. Whatever this kid's reading, this is pretty interesting. Back up for a minute. Whatever this kid's reading is socially stimulating. Those are the mirror neurons activated here. Don't know why. I didn't track down the reason for that, but I noticed that. Whatever it is, it's got the kids socially involved in it. I hope it's not what I think it is, but you never know. Now, true dyslexia, what we call developmental dyslexia, results from when the angulate gyrus is either defective or for some reason doesn't develop. And so what happens then is the burden of learning to read shifts to Broca's area. And as you can see here, in the dyslexic readers, Broca's area is doing all the work. Again, it's very labor intensive, but the kid can learn to read. But it's extremely labor intensive, it's difficult, and a lot of kids just say, the hell with it. You know, they give up or they don't pursue anything that's really difficult to read. Now, we used to think that was essentially a visual problem. Now we know it's auditory. For most kids, about 80% of so-called dyslexic readers, the problem is auditory. What happens is that this, you know about this? A difference in the sync between the auditory and visual processing areas. Hello? Okay. Here's how it works. When I'm reading across a page, my eye scans, called the saccades as across the letters, 15 milliseconds per letter, or per syllable, depending how fast I read. The auditory cortex, interestingly enough, sounds out the word. You know, when you read, you sound it out in your head at 15 milliseconds per word. So they're in sync. What he found in many dyslexic kids, this was discovered back in 2005. Well, what they found was that the visual processing was occurring at 15 milliseconds per we'll say per letter to make it easy. But the auditory processing was taking 50 milliseconds. So if you look at the word dog, the kid's eye was already on G when the auditory cortex was still sounding out the duh, duh, duh. And so later when you said to the kid, write the word dog, he heard duh in his head, but saw what in his visual field? The G. So he writes G. And oh, that's easy. And then because the brain had recognized there were 3 letters there, there must be a D there, but that's so he writes God. We used to think, well, that's obviously a visual problem. It's auditory. And that can be corrected. Programs like Fast Forward, Euphonics, those kinds of programs, which are computer programs, where the kid has to sit in front of the computer with headphones and look at the D and keep seeing the D and duh. So you rewire the brain to associate the D sound with the D letter. And the advantage of using computers is they have one characteristic that teachers don't have, and it's called infinite patience. They can keep doing it over and over and over again. And they have graphics, you know, little animals running across with the G or whatever to keep the kids. All right, that's it. So, what about the reading gap? Let me just mention this, and then I'll take a quick stand-up. Latest scores, we still have a reading gap between females and males. The reading gap now, as of the latest score, is 2017. Girls age 9, there's a 6-point difference. In other words, girls score 6 points higher average score on reading than boys do at that age. 13 is 10 points, and at 17 it's 8 points. Now, why Why the reading gap, again, there's a genetic composition here, a component, in that girls are generally better at language than boys are at the same age because of what we mentioned before. But another thing is technology is preventing the gap from closing, because what happens is, we believe, one of the things, is when girls use social media, they're usually using texting and sharing photos, so essentially language oriented. But when boys are using social, they're using gaming, which is visual. So they're not enhancing their language skills, they're enhancing their visual skills. And they can be pretty good. As you'll see later, visual memory can be very helpful. All right, with that, time for you guys. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment. If you'll be kind enough to take your hand out, and we're going to reflect. We're going to ask you to write down 2 things that you learned in this session so far. This is for you, so be as brief as you need to be. Just what are 2 things? Don't talk to anybody now. This is 2 things you've learned. Give me a few more moments to finish that up. Okay, everybody up? Please. Find somebody next to you who'll talk to you. Do your 10 toe raises. And share your 2 things, either in front of you, behind you, left or right. Don't forget your toe raises. Don't forget your toe raises. Break up those fools. Pull up that flesh. I'm coming around, checking on you.
Touch my students and in appropriate places.
I firmly believe it, that before they have true language ability, they almost develop their own language, and that they fully were able to understand each other amongst themselves.
Yeah, we call that feral language. Sometimes it has nothing to do with real language, right?
I agree.
It just sounds and emotion.
I remember one of my kids saying, whatever learning thing, and his brother would come and learn before. And it was exactly what he wanted.
It's not unusual among identical twins. The identical or the fraternal. Well, again, it's enough of a connection. It's called feral language. They sense each other's needs.
Is that right?
And it often goes through long. Some it goes through life, especially identical twins. It goes through life.
Well, let me tell you, there's certain situations where my son was sick. My other son, and he's sleeping fine. My son wakes up and tells me, Daddy, Juan Carlos is not feeling well. And all of a sudden you hear Juan Carlos wake up and he's sick. You know? It's very interesting.
Psychosomatic.
Very interesting.
How are we doing here? What were your 2 things? Well, what's something new that you learned today?
That's because I'm a math person. I always struggle when I have kids who are just like, I can't do math.
instinct at that point. Oh, drive a car, and ride a bicycle, and motorcycle. Doesn't matter. He needed to be able to stop. Try to find something they're interested in and make that go down. Video games is an easy one for that. I gotta turn my lights on.
Social area of the brain. What's that called?
Well, that's the guy who discovered them, but they're also called mirror neurons.
Yeah, I know all about mirror neurons. I didn't know the individual who discovered
Back in the 1930s.
and it's a region of the brain, a bundle of neurons that are in that area of the brain.
Well, most of them are there. The research seems to suggest there might be some others scattered in different places, but the majority of them are
Von economy.
von economy.
And that von economy is a term for the structure or the area. How do you use
Both.
that term? Yeah?
Both. Because unlike, if you don't mind my drawing, normal neurons in that area look like this. You have the axon, the cell body, and the dendrites here. Von economos look like this. The shaft is much
longer axon
than the dendrites are proportionately. So, in form follows function. Why were they different? We just couldn't figure out why. But he said there's something different about that area of the brain, but I got to fight the war.
And we don't know what.
They didn't know what at that time.
Yeah, they're attributing the link of the axon to the mirror part of the.
Yeah, these were groups, and why were they placed there, and why are they different forms? They must have a special function.
Those are the ones that light up.
And the function was social interaction.
Write it down for you. I thought about, I'm not sure. I thought about something that person was talking about with the keto diet. There's maybe another factor that I'm looking at. A lot of that keto diet is also something that's been taken up by people who do a tremendous amount of exercise. So is it the exercise is warding off
You know, like all these fads, I'm very.
But that might be a third variable.
No question of exercise.
Yeah. So if everyone that's doing keto is also doing exercise, then is it the keto that's warding off Alzheimer's, or is it the exercise that's warding off?
I put my money on the exercise. Where are you going next? Memory system. Good. All right, come on back. I know you're having a lot of fun, but I've just been told by my boss that I got to keep moving. Thank you. All right. Did this interaction raise any serious questions that need to be addressed now? Well, that's good. That means I did a good job. I think. All right, ready to go? Yes. Having fun? Yes. Learning a lot? Yes. Good. I only have 3 out of that one. Here we go. Technology. How is technology affecting our memory systems? Now, yours not so much, but it is. If you have a cell phone, if you get on the internet a lot, your memory system is being affected by that technology. The good news is, the older you are, the slower that effect takes place. The bad news is, the younger you are, is really having a serious impact. And since a lot of what we do in schools relies on people remembering important stuff, you need to know about it. That brain crossing a threshold today, that student's brain is very different than it was. I used to say 10 years ago, but now it's 5 years ago. Very different in lots of ways. Attention, technology is affecting 4 major areas of the brain. Attention, memory. Trying to remember what the other two are. Thinking skills and social skills. Those are the 4 areas being impacted by technology today. And the younger you are, the greater the impact. All right, but I'm going to talk just about, I don't have time to talk about all those. You got a book there, a wonderful book by some guy about engaging the brains of plain well. But I just want to talk about memory systems because I think that's the most important. Let's take a quick look through how the brain acquires information and learns it. Incoming information. I want to also straighten out terms that are getting sloppy. Most of you, when you went to, those of you who've been around a while, when you took biology or whatever you took to learn about memory, you heard 2 terms. We had a temporary memory that was called short term and a permanent one that was called long term. Right. Well, now we understand that we have 2 temporary memories, not 1. So we use the term short term to encompass those 2 temporary memories. All right? The temporary memories are as follows. The first one's called immediate memory. Immediate memory is when you need to hold something for just seconds. For example, I travel, as you know, I travel a lot. I fly a lot, usually in planes. And when I get to the hotel room, sometimes it's too late to eat. The restaurant, there's no restaurant. A few places they pick you up at Motel 2.5, and so there's no place to get food. Not here, of course. It's fine here. So I need to call for takeout. So what do? I go over to the phone book, or these days they have a card usually now that has all the takeout numbers. And I go, okay, 586 676, and I walk over to the phone and I pick it up and I dial 586 676, and I get through to Pizza Hut with the healthy part of Pizza Hut, and order my pizza, and then I hang up. What happens to that number? Gone. That's immediate memory. Now, if it's busy, I continue unpacking, and then what do I have to do 5 or 10 minutes later? You've done this, haven't you? You have to go back and look up the number again, okay? Now, if the number is busy after 6 or 7 times, the brain says, okay, hang on here. Apparently that number is pretty important to you. So rather than just getting it and dropping and getting it, why don't I move it to a working memory, which is the conscious processor. And there it can sit for a while instead of dropping out in just seconds. And then, but again, once I'm finished with it, out it goes. So these 2 things now are what we mean by short-term memory. So avoid using the term short-term memory because we almost never talk about immediate memory. It has very little importance in what we do. So start using the term working memory. Somebody moved this. I didn't know what it was. Isn't that interesting? Okay, working memory. That's the term you want to use. That's a conscious processor. Anything you're thinking about now is in working memory. Now, that's been examined for a long time. And then eventually you have long-term memory, which you hope the wonderful stuff you're teaching them will go there eventually. Is that your hope? Hello? Yeah. All right, good. Now, working memory has been studied since the 1950s. George Miller. Simon came later. George Miller was the first guy who started working on this in the 50s. And he found that working memory had a capacity. It only kept so many things at one time. And what he discovered is if before the 3rd cognitive leap, as what's his name called it, Piaget, you can hold about 5 things in there, plus or minus 2, depending on the person. Think of the bell curve, 5 in the middle, outliers 3 to 5. Then when you went through the 3rd cognitive leap, you had about 7. And so he wrote a book called The Magic Number 7. And that has been gospel for many years. People got master's degrees and doctor's degrees repeating this thing. Finally, in the 1990s, we said, basta, that's enough. We don't need to have it anymore. We've proven this, we're going to move on. So nothing was done with it until about 10 years ago, about 2007 or 8 in Washington University in St. Louis. Some cognitive psychologists said, I wonder whether technology is affecting your cognitive capacity. And so they repeated those programs of memory, and they had quite a shock. The numbers had changed. It wasn't 5 and 7 anymore. And they published this, and of course, what happens, you publish something like that, the scientific world goes crazy because it was so different, and they started repeating the experiments, and they found the same thing that these guys did at Washington. What they discovered is that number had dropped to 3 or 4. In other words, our capacity for working memory is decreasing. And this raises a very important question: why? Now, what they found was the younger the participants they used were from 7 years old to 60. And what they found was the younger kids were much closer to 3 and 4, and the older people were closer to 7. So again, and that would make sense because the impact on an older brain would be slower. But the younger brain, where you want kids to remember stuff, is the one where the greatest decreases occur. Now, why? We still don't have a definitive answer that we can say is scientifically acceptable. But what we can say is that there is something out there that that's fairly close to what we believe could be it, and that is the following. In the old days, like when I went to middle school and science class, we had to memorize we had 9 planets in those days. Pluto was still an official planet. Now it's been demoted. Although there's a Restore Pluto to the Planet. Did you hear that? There's a Restore Pluto movement there, and I contributed to that. Anyway, we had to memorize the planets of the solar system in order from the sun. And I had to sit there and remember, and we had a little mnemonic. My mother made very earnest pizzas to get a mnemonic alphabet. My very earnest mother made 9 pieces. So on we went. So you had to remember it. These days, you ask that question, kids go, here it is. Now, if you don't believe me, start asking people what their home phone number is.
Oh, that's right.
Wait a minute, I got it here somewhere. They forget it. Why? Because it's on their cell phone. Oh, if I want to call home, I just press home on the thing, or the picture of that. I guess that's my significant other. Press that thing, and it'll ring. So what's happening is we're shifting the burden of remembering a critical feature to technology. Now, there are 2 sides to this. Most of us, like me, think this is not a desirable effect to have, which is why I say get off the technology as much as you can. Use it only for survival, not for daily operations. But there are other people who say, well, you know, if you free up the working memory and it only has just 3 or 4, then maybe it's got more room to do higher order thinking. Maybe if we did higher order thinking in the classroom, but we don't because of the pressure of covering curriculum. As one guy says, I don't have time. This is a 30-year math teacher. He said to me, I don't have time to talk about the brain. I got to cover curriculum. I got to cover curriculum. That's what he said. It was, veins stuck out in the middle of his forehead. I got to cover curriculum. I don't have time. You want me to teach you the brain? I said, well, what part of the anatomy have you been teaching to? The kidney, the liver, or what? I mean, he didn't realize how silly that was. I got to cover curriculum. You know what? You don't need the kids there to cover curriculum, do you? Isn't that true? Kids don't have to be there to cover curriculum. Just get in front of the class and just start battling off what you're doing. All right, that's another. All right, David, keep moving. Now, what happens is, because the kid's brain is able to carry fewer items in working memory, but we still think they can carry more because we've been doing that for 20 years, we start overloading the brain. And when you start overloading the brain, what happens is the frontal lobe shuts down and says, you've had the situation, I'm sure you've been studying something, okay, that's enough. I can't take any more. When that happens, the frontal lobe shuts down, and the limbic area, the emotional part of the brain, picks up and says, I can't do this, I want to do something else, this is crazy, and why am I doing this? And so the emotions start taking over the rational part of the brain. So, what's the lesson to be learned here in the classroom? Less is more. Better to take fewer points and work and drill them deep so you get good understanding, good interaction, higher level thinking, rather than just, curriculum is like an ice pond, where it's a mile long and an inch deep, and you got to get from this end to that end from September to May, and some kids want to stop halfway. I want to bury deep here and find out more about this. Oh, don't have time, got to cover curriculum. So if there are too many themes, in the same lesson, the students will disengage. Once you fill that working memory, say, you know what, I've had enough of this. And they'll work under the table with their devices. Let me borrow this for a moment, so I promise I won't read it. I just want to read it as a prop. And what happens is they become very good at making you think they're engaged, because they learn that if they're not engaged, you're going to pounce on them. So they pretend they're engaged. And kids who have become experts at this, they'll do things like this. And if they think you're not paying attention, they'll go. And you'll say, damn, am I good or what? But they're not, you may not have a lot of room in working memory, but they're not stupid. They know how to get around it. Okay, well, so.
It seems to me the students are learning more. There's more information out there, even in psychology. There's just more for them to get. And we are teaching it. So is it because we're using so many different learning styles?
Well, I hope so.
like graphics?
I hope you're learning that you have to vary what you do in the classroom, bring novelty in the classroom. But you also have to go back and say, how much of this is really worth teaching? How much of this is, top level, really important stuff, or is it just incidental stuff that maybe they can get on their own? Okay. Now, this limitation of working memory is affecting kids' ability to read. People can learn to read at different speeds. What happens here is that if my working memory has a lower capacity, then I start reading across the page, and as I'm getting across the page, the words that are in working memory start to drop out as they move along the sentence because they already have limited capacity. So by the time I get to an end of a sentence, let's say get 10 words in it, I've forgotten what the first part was. And so I don't get meaning because I don't have all the pieces. See? So that's one way in which technology is affecting the ability to learn to read. Because kids these days, as you know, toddlers, 1 year old, all the toys they have now are push buttons, right? I mean, they're going to have one waiting for them as they come out of the womb. Hey, how was your trip? Rate your trip out of the womb. How was the birth canal? Clean enough for you? Enough sightseeing along the way? Just press 1 for yes, 2 for no, 1 for extremely agree, 5 for extremely, This is crazy. But that's what's happening. That's training that brain now at a very early age to rely on devices rather than their own capabilities. And some of you are doing that too. Maybe subconsciously, but that's what's happening. Okay, so as the eye moves across the page, the words at the beginning of the page tend to drop out of working memory. All right, now we talked about, someone mentioned about video games. There are some good things to say about video games if they're the right kind. They do tend to enhance visual working memory, so that would help that kid who's got problems with losing stuff along the line, because what happens is they chunk the words then. Instead of each word being a separate item, they'll chunk 3 words and make it 1 item. So it improves reading fluency, geometry, visual arts, and sports. So there are some advantages. I don't want you to think I'm down on technology. I'm down on the frequency of use and the age at which we begin to use it and how we're using it. I mean, I think it's wonderful that technology develops prosthesis for people who lose limbs, stuff like that. There's some fantastic things. Stents for heart problems, that kind of stuff. I'm all for that. What I worry about is how it affects the brain's ability to learn and survive comfortably and happily in a social environment. That's my concern. All right, let's talk about the emotional brain for a moment. Any questions up to this point? I want to talk about emotions, and one of the things that we find more and more happening now, maybe the spirit in your schools, is trauma. I deal with kids in trauma, so let's get to that. What we have to understand is all information coming into the brain does not have the same priority. What's the brain's main job? Survival. So all survival information has high priority. So no matter what pearls of wisdom are flowing from my lips right now, if all of a sudden you start smelling smoke and the vision here starts to decrease, no matter what I say, your brain's going to say what to you? Get your butt out of here, right? Because survival comes first. So kids who are in survival-threatening situations, when they come to school, they're just thinking, how am I going to make it till the next day? Then comes emotions. Now notice they say here, reflexive, reflexive. You respond, when you smell that smoke, you don't say, gee, I smell smoke. Now what do you think I should do? Well, what are my options? Well, Susan's really into things I can look at him. And maybe the fire will go away. No, it's not. Boom, out. Which is what you should do. Emotion is the same thing, reflexive. So anything with emotional content will have high priority over the third thing, which is new learning, which is reflective, not reflexive. And that's what we call, what do we call that? Curriculum. Right, curriculum. You can spell it K-R-K-L-M. Curriculum. Nice and easy. Yeah, there it is. So what is this telling us? That before kids are going to pay attention to whatever curriculum you have, they have to feel physically safe and emotionally secure. If those two things aren't in place, you're wasting your time, at least with that particular student. So you've got to pay attention to that. And it starts early. Look at this. Kids showing up, kindergarten. What? I have to stay here every day for a year? I don't even remember having a trial. Well, it was funny if you were there, I guess. People in Mississippi laughed at this a lot. What happens to the brain during trauma? This is a new piece I've added to my presentation in the last year or two. Because as I traveled around the country, I keep getting this question about kids coming to school with real problems, either at home or on their way to school. With drugs in the household, domestic violence, bullying siblings, bullying on their way to school, something that endangers their survival and emotional stability before they even get to the classroom. And for some kids, the classroom is the safest place for them to be. They come, and as a result, they come to you for food, they come to you for safety, and teaching is just, the ABCs are really down the line. I have to feel safe and feel emotionally accepted. So the term in loco parentis has never been truer than today. We just don't teach kids anymore in schools, we raise them. And that has put tremendous pressure on the teacher population. And it's why teachers are leaving at such a fast rate. 50% in 5 years, that's a lot. 10% loss every year. A big loss. And not many kids are entering. Not many people are entering the profession. Because of low pay, low status in the community, disrespect, that kind of stuff. So,
What's the fix?
Pardon me?
What's the fix?
What's the fix? All right, let me sit down and we'll go into this for a while. Look, I'm not going to pretend I have the magic bullet to fix that. Obviously, teachers have to, the public has to respect more of what they do. They think, I still hear, well, hey, they got a pretty good deal. They get paid for 12 months, but they only work for 10 months, and they get the summer off, and they only work from 8 to 3. Boy, it's real. I was a teacher. I didn't work from 8 to 3. I had papers to correct. I had lessons to plan. I had kids who had problems I had to deal with, special ed kids. I had to work with special. No, it wasn't. It wasn't the lark that people think it is. And that's one thing. We have to educate the public what schools are really like. And I think having parents in schools can sometimes help see what teachers really do in the classroom. Secondly, I think we've got to put more money into it. Remember, teaching is the one profession that makes all of the professions possible. So that ought to be where you put your money, in my opinion. Again, those are, and one of the main problems, and I'll stop here because I don't want to get, I got most important stuff for you. The main problem is that people who make decisions about what happens in education are not educators. No other profession has that. Doctors make decisions about doctors, lawyers make decisions about lawyers, politicians make decisions about them. Okay.
I was just going to say that all that is absolutely true, but would you agree that the short answer to what you just said actually, in terms of what's the fix, lies with society, not with education, as far as the impacts that you're talking about?
I think we're doing the best we can, given the situation.
With education or society?
Yeah, no, teachers.
For sure. So to answer his question, it's a societal problem that is now the burden that is on teachers because of what's going on in the communities.
Society and political.
Yeah, well.
Yeah,
Well,
it's part of it. Okay, brain during trauma. Let's just move on now. The brain, two main systems in the brain. You've got the logical system, which is what we call the executive system. That's the frontal lobe right here. And that logical system has 5 major functions. It does higher order thinking, problem solving, personality, your personality. That's why severe blows, severe blows to the front of the head can change your personality. You know about that? People who've been in automobile accidents, they hit their head and they're a different person for a while. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. And you know, some women think, hey, you know, bat across the forehead, how's that? I got a new man. No, it doesn't always work that way. Working memory and control limbic response, control emotions. These are the 5 major functions of your frontal lobe. So if your frontal lobe gets damaged, any or all of those can be affected. Now, the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain, which is in pink here, the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system, processes emotions, then also decides how to respond to those emotions. So when I was over here talking to this gentleman and saying something that offended him, his brain responded emotionally, which causes a change in his face expression, and then it's going to say, how do I respond to this? Do I say something to him? Do I punch him in the nose? Do I walk away? How am I going to respond to this? And that will usually be dependent on how serious the offense is. Or not. Okay. Now, what's interesting is, keep in mind that these 2 parts of the brain, the rational thinking part and the emotional part, do not develop at the same rate. I think you have this in your handout, don't you? The emotional brain is fully mature by about the age of 10 to 12, a little earlier in girls, a little later in boys, generally speaking. So the kid is fully emotionally mature. I'm not saying acts mature, I'm saying the system is mature at the age of 10 to 12. But the rational part of the brain, the part of the brain that is responsible for controlling the emotional system, doesn't mature until 23, 24, 25 years of age. So kids in college are not adults. We measure adults in science by the maturity, full maturity of the frontal lobe, and that occurs at the ages of 24 to 25. So even young kids, young adults out of college are still not adults in terms of full command of their frontal lobe systems, executive systems. So I put that line in there at 12 so that you understand the brain of a middle schooler. In a middle schooler, the kid is going to, if he's walking down the aisle and someone bumps into him, his initial response will be emotional. Sorry about that. His initial response will be emotion. Damn it. His initial response will be emotional. And because the rational system hasn't even kicked in yet. And that's why the teacher takes the kid, you know, he may turn around, punch him, take him to the office, and while he's sitting in the principal's office waiting for the principal to come, his emotional system will kick, his rational system will kick in. What did you just do? And so when he goes in the office and the principal says, Johnny, why did you do that? What does he say? I don't know. Is he lying? No, but so often the principal thinks he is. He isn't lying. He doesn't know because he didn't have time to think about it. So it's ridiculous to say, well, you should know better. And don't say that to a toddler. Or you should know better. He's not going to know better. You're defying the laws of nature when you say that. You should know better. That's simple. What you do is explain what happened. And tell him to either count to 10 backwards or don't say forward, because when it's 10, boom, punch him in the nose anyway. Or have him, what we do, or tell principals do, is ask the kid, if he wants to do something, spell his name backwards. That'll slow him down. Gives him about 10 seconds, enough for the frontal lobe to begin to process and say, hey, you don't want to get involved here. It was an accident, just keep moving. All right. Oh, this is interesting. Look at that blue arrow down the bottom. See that down there? That tells us, look at it, before 0. That tells us that the frontal lobe is active in the 9th month in utero. Isn't that cool? We know that because it gives off beta waves that we can measure outside the womb. So, in the 9th month in utero, the baby's brain is problem solving. What problem do you think it's trying to solve? How do I get out of here? Damp and cold and crowded and clammy and that door looks so small. Moving right along. Now, what happens is, when kids are under trauma of whatever kind, mild to severe, the executive system shuts down and the limbic system picks up. Why? Because what happens is, when you're under stress, cortisol goes into the bloodstream. And the brain demands more norepinephrine. Now, let me show you what happens here. You see that bottom, it says cortisol. Cortisol is the pre-adrenaline alert hormone. It says to the brain, be alert because something's stressing you and you got to find out the cause of the stress, the heck of the ABCs. Now, what happens is when you have these stress hormones in the body, the long-term memory and working memory, their efficiency decreases because they're focusing on the stress. You reduce the ability of the frontal lobe to control those emotions, so the person's going to act more emotionally. There's a shift in cognitive processing to survival mode. And emotional responses override logical responses. So those are all the things that happen as the norepinephrine increases. Let me pass that up because I'm going to show you this way. And here's how it happens. How does the brain make more norepinephrine? When the body is in trauma, it demands more norepinephrine. Now, you don't give yourself a shot of it. It's in you. How does it do it? It takes dopamine and it hydrolyzes the dopamine, adding a hydroxyl radical there to it, and makes more norepinephrine. So what happens is the concentration of norepinephrine goes in, but since it makes it from dopamine, what happens to the concentration of dopamine? It goes down. And what does dopamine do? It's part of the reward cycle, motivation, pleasure, perseverance. Those are all the things dopamine does, along with other things like coordinate the motor cortex to the cerebellum. So if you don't have enough dopamine, you get Parkinson's disease. That's one of the things it does. So that goes down. Meanwhile, the cognitive processing is shifted to survival mode. So when kids are in trauma, their body is producing more trauma-related chemicals that are going to make it more difficult for them to focus on what's going on. So what happened here? Recognizing some of the signs of trauma. These will vary with individuals. Again, you can get this somewhere else. Intention, and try to finish up here. Not all of these will be present, but they'll be present in different working memory, high anxiety. You'll know it when you see it. Now, how to help. Let's talk about how to help, because this is the more important, the applications of this. Number one, you've got to make sure that schools and classrooms are physically safe and emotionally secure. Welcome the kids. No phony smiles. Glad to see you. Happy to have you here. And never allow disrespect between students. In classrooms, you often get respect between the teacher and student, but then the teacher will allow a kid to pick on another kid, not say anything, not intervene. Next is alert students any expected major changes. Now, this is not novelty. We're not saying you shouldn't do novelty. What we're saying is, if there's a major change in routine, let them know because this can affect them emotionally. Have a safe place for kids who begin to go off the deep end. Have a safe place they can go and just calm down. And it shouldn't be the principal's office, because that's associated with discipline. You don't want to make the kid feel like, well, because you're not feeling well, because you're under stress, I'm going to discipline you. So you send them to maybe the nurse's office, and guidance office, somewhere other than discipline. And when appropriate, make accommodations. You probably do this already. Give shorter assignments or allow more. I have never understood the notion of time tests. Once you understand how the brain learns, time tests are ridiculous. If the purpose of a test is to find out how much a kid knows, you give them time to tell you how much you know. Now, it doesn't mean it goes forever. But, you get 15 minutes to answer this or you fail. Or, allow enough time for most kids to finish. Note that behavioral problems may be temporary. Kid loses his temper. Too often teacher takes it personally. If a kid is under severe trauma, has a breakdown, and they think, well, is that me? It often isn't. And this above all, take care of yourself. avoid compassion fatigue. One of the reasons we do excellent degrees of teachers, one of the reasons that he left, a good friend of mine, in fact, a math teacher for 25 years in high school, wanted to stay longer. He just got out. He said, look, kids are coming to me with sex problems, with problems with dope, domestic violence. And in that state, he taught in New Jersey. In that state, if a kid tells you something about domestic violence, you are required by law to report it to the authorities. And if you don't, you can go to jail. So teachers say, don't tell me. Don't tell me about that. I'm sorry, Dad, don't tell me. Go tell the appropriate authorities. Because if you tell them and they don't report it, they're in trouble. That's too much pressure. He said, I came here to help kids understand the wonders of mathematics, not to be their sex counselor, their therapist, how to deal with domestic violence, all that kind of thing. It's not what I'm trained for. And I'm afraid I'll give the wrong advice, and so I'm out of here. And it's a shame. He left after long before he wanted to, but that wasn't what he was trained to do. All right. Let's finish up. Can you jot down, how about something you might do as a result of being here? We have a lot to cover yet. I'm sorry, put your pen over there. You want to take a break? It's up to you. I don't care. I'm fine. One thing you might do as a result of this session. Something you might do.
No, I'm just raising my hand for you.
Something you might do? Oh, no, that's all right. Let's talk. So who do I turn this over to?
We're talking about gaming, video gaming for kids. So I've noticed actually a lot of students will play games together with like the headphones.
This is not interacting gaming.
So you're talking about like when students are playing
one person on the game. Because you do interacting,
I've noticed a lot of the
drift
kids,
of something else.
Because I've noticed a lot of the kids will like get together and they'll play games, not like together in person, but they're playing games at home together. So that's a positive thing you consider?
Positive thing is playing it alone.
So wait, the positive is playing alone? So it's not.
If you play with somebody else, other things come in here that decrease the effectiveness of the game. They start talking about girlfriends or homework or other stuff. And
so would you consider the social aspect of gaming a positive or negative?
that I don't call that a social aspect at all. It's an anti-social aspect. Social aspect is face to face. Through technology, in person, and we want to. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, I have not covered all I hoped to cover, but I am delighted to have had this opportunity. I hope you've learned something and that you've enjoyed this as much as I have. I'm now turning this over to the powers that be, and they'll tell you where we go from here. Thank you very much for your Someone wants to put one.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susan. That was very, very informative, very interactive. I really appreciate taking time. So Dr. Sousa will still be around?
Oh, yeah.
You'll still be around for a little bit, so after this next session, So, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Oh, just one more thing. We are live streaming, so it's on YouTube on a live stream channel because we engage the school all the way in Nigeria. And so they're
So good morning, everybody. Or is it still? It is still morning. So hi, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Sousa. That was a wonderful presentation. How's everybody doing? You guys are everybody's alive and awake, I see. Did anybody do anything fun in this last week, or you have something fun planned for this coming weekend? Somebody, let's go. Tell me. Michelle? Oh, she's not here. She stepped up. My wife is here, and I was going to pick on her. So somebody did something fun. Tell me, somebody, please. Don't be shy. Halloween's coming up. We're excited about that. Why am I asking you this? I open every single class that I teach with that exact question. Did anybody do anything fun since the last time I saw you? And I'll usually throw a little personal something about myself also when I'm talking to them. The first few weeks, I got crickets. Did anybody do anything fun this week? And nothing. So I have 35 students, and not one of them did anything fun over the last week. But as the weeks go by, and they realize I'm going to ask them every week, I've learned a lot about my students. I know that one is a world champion competitive cheerleader. I know that one babysits his siblings. I know that one's a traveling musician. I know that one of them burned a pan of brownies last weekend. I know that one took their kids to the pediatrician and the other one has a flu. And I learned all of this stuff through my students. And as the semester goes on, I use those little nuggets to help me establish relationships with them. When they come in, I say, how's your son? Is he feeling better? Little comments like that. And they learn a little bit about me. They ask me how my children's swim meet went or something like that. And it's very brief, and it only takes a few seconds. And what it does is it establishes a sense of community in my classroom that when my students walk in, they want to be in there. They're interested in me, and they know that I'm interested in them. And it's very genuine. And I think that that's supported by some of the work that I've read in Dr. Sousa's stuff. The book that he has, by the way, is phenomenal. He didn't ask me to say that, but it really is. There's a table in there, and maybe you could tell me where I'm not sure exactly where it is, but towards the beginning quarter of the book, where he talks about what are some required components of a rewired classroom. What are some things that you're supposed to, that you should be doing in order to reach today's learner? And I try to incorporate as many of those things into my stuff as I can too. And a lot of them are just things that we're educators. They're just things that we do anyway. And so I kind of want to go through a couple of them. Just to kind of highlight how I've translated them from teaching children to now teaching adults. And I think they're things that most of us do anyway, or we could at least discuss for a minute. One is that I really try to establish a sense of community. One of the courses that I teach talks about diversity, and we examine topics, and it's through the lens of education, but we go bigger than that. We talk about things like politics, and we talk about religion and gender, and all of and race and all of those types of things that can be very contentious. And I realized very quickly that if I have a group of students who are isolated, they're going to have a hard time sharing their own experiences with those things. I can't run a class where I'm talking about the experiences of what it's like to be a Hispanic female. You know why? Right? But I have a lot of Hispanic females in my classroom, and I value their experiences, and I want to hear from them. But I know that they're not going to be comfortable sharing those things unless they feel comfortable with me and also with each other. So I have some activities that I do with them towards the beginning where I get them to know each other. One small example of this is that I have these, they're kind of like stress balls, but they're made out of yarn or whatever. And I have my students get in groups, small groups, medium-sized groups anyway, and they start saying their own name and tossing the ball to somebody else. And after we get through that a couple times, I have them say the name of the person they're throwing it to. And we do that for a couple minutes, and then I introduce another ball into the circle, and another ball, and it gets kind of chaotic. But over a few minutes, what they've done is they've learned the names of at least the people that are in their group. And I do that on day one. And afterwards, we'll do a small group activity where they'll be interacting with each other, calling each other by name, sharing a little bit about themselves. And what it does is it sets the stage for future class times when we do have to get into topics of religion or other things that can be points of contention with some people. As much as I can, If any of you go into a class and the furniture is kind of rearranged, not the way you like it, it might be my fault, and I apologize. But as much as I can, I have my students working in groups because I believe that that sense of community is important. You think about that a lot of times when you think of a kindergarten, first, second grade class where they're doing circle time and doing groups and stuff like that. And then college tends to be like sterile rows where everybody's sitting all by themselves. And I think that that's not really the way that we should be doing things. People are social. We like to talk to each other. We like to interact. So establishing a sense of community is something that I really try to do. Use humor as much as you can. I am hilarious. Yes. Part of it also goes with having a loose structure. I don't have time to set up a seating chart, and we don't really do that in the college class anyway. But I mix up my groups, and they're not always in groups, but a lot of times they'll be in groups, and sometimes I'll have them switch groups. It's kind of like if any of you go to a certain restaurant or a house of worship or to a classroom setting, people always tend to sit in the same spot, right? And our students do that also. So every once in a while, I'll mix it up. I'll have this side of the room go here and this side of the room go there, and it makes them feel very uncomfortable for a little while. But just having that new group of people to work with can be beneficial to them also. I want my students to be part of their knowledge construction. I don't pretend to know everything about everything. I value their experiences, and I encourage them to share those experiences with me as part of the class. We learn from each other. As much as I can, I incorporate technology in games. Some of you, everybody's used Kahoot before, but there are other ones, even through using a YouTube video. We're not going to have time for it this morning. If you don't know about Socrative is a wonderful piece of technology that you can use to do kind of like an exit slip. Dr. Sousa had us writing down 3 takeaways or 2 important points or maybe 1 big idea that we can incorporate into our classroom. You can do that using this program called Socrative, where the students will do it on their phone. 3 questions, 5 questions. They could be math questions. They could be whatever your topic is that you're teaching, and those responses get sent to you. And it only takes the students a few seconds to do it, especially once they're used to it. And then as a teacher, I'm able to look at what the responses are and see if I've done my job. If it was a concept in the field of education and I asked them a question about it and everybody got it wrong, I would think maybe I needed to talk about this again next week. The data, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's just, for a quick example, let's say I was teaching a math lesson. 3 quick questions at the end of the lesson. You would all do it independently. It would all get sent to me as the professor. And then I could save it, print it, put it as an Excel, whatever I wanted to do.
Do it as a quick pre or quick post.
Absolutely. You could do it as a pre and a post, sure. And that way you could see if there was any growth or that. As much as I can, I try to differentiate my instruction with them. I can't assume that all of my students are on the same level. In some of our courses, I have them examining curriculum, and I have them developing lessons and developing lesson plans. And naturally, some students are just kind of quicker at that than others are. And so there are times when I'll group the students who are a little bit more accelerated. I'll group them together so that they can kind of feed off each other, so I can devote some more of my time with the group that might be struggling a little bit. Or sometimes there's merit in mixing those groups and having the faster learner work with somebody who might be struggling a little bit so they can help each other. I group them by interest. I put my sports lovers over here and my people who love food over here and the people that like this over here so that they have something in common, and that helps them drive their conversation and their work that they do. I talked about exit slips, and that was the one that I had today was 3 things that you learned from today's presentation. So those are just some of the things that I do, and I know you all do wonderful things as well, and I'll pass the mic over to you.
So this is the time you could get up, stretch, do the toes. I think it's a good idea because I got to set up the... All right, so obviously it's very difficult to go after such great speakers, but I'll do my best to do what I always try to do. And if you notice, the idea, my focus is actually to have students develop an appreciation, an interest, and respect of neuroscience, how important it is, regardless of the discipline. And so the approach that I use is I came up with something, and I love acronyms, NEAT pedagogical approach, which is neuroeducainment. It's 3 words, neuroscience, education, and entertainment. Especially today, you want people to love. If I tell them something about neuroscience, they may forget, but I'll start with a very basic one, right? And how is that connected? So if I tell to someone, I like entertaining people when I'm introducing them, all of a sudden people start giving me, what do they think about me? What would be usual response? I like entertaining people. What do you think of me? They give me jokes, they think I'm sort of social and funny, and I go, listen to me again. I like entertaining people. And it usually takes about 30 seconds for them to get it. The people that I hang around, my friends, are entertainers. And I like entertaining people. And that gets them into that. So there's a cognition process that's going on. Wow, why do I do that? So just as a description, I use the 4 elements, right? The 4 E's. Engage, entertain, and enlighten. If I don't engage you, there's no interest. That's the first. And I got to make you activate your limbic system from fear of education, which is usually, oh, this is too much, and this is neuroscience. And I tell them something, fun fact. I'll say, what is one organ around your skull that is the same size when you're born, when you die? They go, what? Your eyeball. That's why babies are so beautiful. They got big eyes, right? And so you stay like that. And then I say, you know what? Let's just start. We're here to do what? We want to actually be transformative and enjoy the experience. So what I found, students begin to do this on their own. They bring me inspirational quotes, signs, phrases, and so I'll say, let's become mindful. They're like, what does that mean? And so they read this, let's be present in a moment. And we'll do a simple 30-second exercise, grounding and calming, right? Where they just close their eyes, focus on their sensation in their arm and leg. And then I do diaphragmatic breathing. Very simple, right? And they actually now even learn when I don't need to do this anymore, I'll see them doing things like that, right? Now, and then I start getting into this idea of reinforcing how much can you learn? What can you do? It is not just limited to what you're born with, or this is what happened to you. And so I focus on this idea of growth mindset, neuroplasticity. And one of the things I tell them, this idea you failed or you're not good at math, reframe that. Fail means your first attempt in learning. When you switch that paradigm, okay, you didn't get it yet. And that's a very big concept because they say, I'll never get math. You'll get it in 1,000 times, even if that's the case, but you'll get it. But there's also something else that's confusing. Effort is not just getting it. Have you tried it a different way? You keep doing the math the same way and expecting a different result, it's not going to happen, right? So we move on. And then this is more, and I could share this with you, I use this approach in guiding students. Like, what does it really mean, growth mindset, right? And I'll talk to them about, let's try a different teaching. Let's see if you could learn from a different pattern, right? The most important one, why is this relevant? So in anything I teach, it's social psychology, current events, in psychology, how's this going to help you remember better? In psychology of genocide, how do we overcome morality, or questions of morality? How do we reconcile that? And then I also bring in, there's a social neuroscience component. You can't forget the brain and interaction with the environment, right? And how they both modify each other. And then I get into, again, trying to inspire them. This idea of really what I focus on is post-traumatic growth, right? Not post-traumatic stress. That what you've endured is what made you stronger. And if you take that, then what basically happened is not the design for what will happen, right? And what's within you. And so the other one is, it's not to be different than someone else or compare yourself. It's how much are you better than you were, right? And so this is just more of a general approach that I share. Then I make it applicable. I say, well, why are we doing this? Look, you want a job. Right? Let's be realistic. You want a workforce. So what do we need? Look at what's looked at. Critical thinking, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence. This is beyond just book knowledge. I could have much information of the brain, but if I can't interact with a patient or a client, I could have all the knowledge of the content, which is actually, pedagogy has lost sort of the idea. We need science as an art to create teaching, but we don't do that as much. I know the content, but how you're delivering it, it's not getting across, right? And so then I say, think of education as perpetual. It's not, I finished my diploma. It is learning to learn and not what, because I tell my students, don't even worry about learning what. It's in the computer, it's in the book. But learn how to think about that and decipher, especially today, how do you differentiate between information, right? So then I get into this, I say, well, what do you think about what is psychology and, how does the brain work? And there's two ways of looking at it. I said, you see, we have different ways of looking at something from a different perspective. That's the social component. But neuroscience, what is driving us? Well, obviously, you know what's driving the kitty cat, right? And the child, I wish in a way sometimes we were children, because the child is in awe. We're like, oh, whatever, right? And then I say, well, let's look at optical illusions. And this is that whole idea that goes both in the psychological and neuropsychological domain. How do we see things? So if you look, what do you see? Yeah, that's because you probably know. Exactly. How about here? Do you see a face right here? Yes, right? Well, here it goes. There's no face. There's a phenomenon that happens to all of us, which is called pareidolia. We see faces and make images of faces. Now, there's an interesting condition, which is next to the angular gyrus that you heard, which is an effusiform gyrus, which causes prosopagnosia. People do not recognize a face. Because of that, we wouldn't even be around if we didn't know that social information. If I couldn't connect with my mom, because I know her, it would be detrimental. And same thing with a teacher and so forth, right? So any of you who see the face, it's just a baby sitting on a father's lap. Can you see it now? Okay? Well, this is the baby right here. This is the hat, this is the little face, this is the little arm, this is the little other arm. Can you see that? See, you know what's also great? The students go, and then they go, wait, I have a question. Did you see this? And then I go, well, page 4. I actually got them. And even if the other one is, if they're going like this, they're trying, we know this issue. I go, Google this, pareidolia. And they go, oh, okay. And so you get them. We get them engaged, right? Now, can I talk without the mic just for briefly? Can you hear me? No? I can hear you. New York, you can't hear me. Okay. All right. So when I talk about frontal lobes, I can do this with one hand. Okay. When I talk about frontal lobes and you start explaining the executive function, the critical thinking sounds fancy, and there's all these orbital frontal, dorsolateral domains. I go, okay, let's start with this. You have a limbic system. The limbic system has amygdala. You're nervous right now because you're freaking out. It also has a hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is your regulator. And they go, but what does it do? How do I go, just remember 4 Fs. Fight, flight, feed, mate. I have to be PG-13 today. Did you get that? Fight, flight, feed, mate. 4 Fs. Guess what? No student has ever missed that question on my exam. They go, 4 Fs, we know it. I go, very good. But then I say, so there's the connection to your frontal lobe. What does that mean to plan, to organize, to articulate speech? I go, think about this very simply, to say be babo, be kiji, and they start articulating. Okay, then I go, how about motor sequencing? Put your hand like this, right? Then like this, and then like this. So, and do it as fast as you can. This, that. Yeah, I see people having like perseveration, maybe frontal lobe damage occurring. No. Okay, but now watch this. Palm, fist, edge. And say it. So when I have a student, I go, please read the passage, and then tell me the 3 main points. They tell me maybe 1, maybe 2. I go, read it out loud again. Oh, I go, why, what happened? 2 modalities. The more modalities you put in to acquiring that information, you get it. That's 1. 2, I said, when you take the test, did you guide yourself palm fist edge? No, I was just trying to remember what I do. I go, but where were the words? Where was this? I could do that. I go, well, that's not cheating. That's in your brain, right? So you have, and so I'll have them do that. Or for example, when I talk about parietal lobe, and I say, how do you know right, left, spatial orientation? Do this. Take this, and go like this. And they'll sit there and go, huh? Right? Or then I tell them, do this. I started having students, this is their meditation. They're just sitting there. They go, great, we're getting this. And so I'm connecting what is each part of the brain doing and how is it helping you to plan your activity, to organize your day, what have you. So how are we on time? Okay, so so there's different examples that I have, right? And we talked about what's very important about actually allowing the student is to estimate. You develop frontal lobe by saying, let's think about this. So let's estimate, even whatever knowledge you have, how does that connect? And you reason through it, right? And so verbal fluency, how many concepts can you name that deal with aggression, that deal with prejudice, right? And then this is actually what I use as sort of a platform from where I work. That's my first one, okay. So I say, welcome to a 3-pound universe. And everything that evolves in my course, it's built there. It's right? And so we'll have lectures, obviously, here. Then for every lecture, if I need to remove that whole mundane and sort of monotonous lecture, I say, well, we have a little video, right? And there's a video that addresses each part. Then we'll say, you know what, let's do a little activity. And we have some activities that are, for example, games. Right? Brain party, get it? Jeopardy, right? Right? And they could be split in the groups, they could be one-on-one, and then they compare, and I say, okay, we'll pick one, and they go, okay, neurotransmitters for 100, what is this affected? And they go, oh, serotonin. And I go, wonderful, you got a point, right? And so we keep going. The other one we have, let me see if this, no. I share my love with my wife. No. Yes, I will. You could have all this. Yes. Is there like some sort of a delay here? But the other one, I do a lot of, actually all the students do entry ticket to the class and exit ticket, which is, what did you read? What are the 3 muddiest points? And you could have variations. And they actually like it because then we'll say, here's what we're going to review it. Here's what we're going to look at. And this is, I think, their favorite game. Let me just check. Not I think. And this I do right in the beginning. This is like after, basically, even like chapter 1. Right? And so they go, okay, pick one. Go ahead. Who? The revolving door. Okay, Skinner explained learning how. Those, excuse me, psychology professors. Explain learning by what? Yeah, which kind? Learning by operant condition, right? And so they do all these, and it's fun. That's one. Another important one is. That was it. Nothing. It's just they're arbitrary. Now it's being too much psychoanalysis, you know, like looking for. Now, there's also, so a lot of there are discussions, and real big one that I actually emphasize, all of my students read literature regarding technology and its effects on our brains and academic performance. And I say, this is no more of my preaching, not some weird professor from, that's saying, oh, this is bad. Here's literature, and you will see the evidence, right? Or I tell them, I go ahead, Just have the phone next to you and take notes. And another one, please don't have it. And they'll get it better, those that the ones don't have it. Because there's actually a condition now called nomophobia. No kidding. DSM wants to do it. Fear of being without a phone. Yes, it's a, but in critical thinking, what we go through is basically just first being introduced, how do we look at information? Why do we make assumptions, right? For example, or how do we get into stereotypes, right? What are the blind spots? So like for this example, this individual is an accomplished 20th century figure. Prior to entering politics, worked as a research chemist and tax attorney. And they say, who is it? They go, I don't know exactly. But can you have a feeling? And they'll say, oh, it's a man, it's white, it's 50 years old. This is actually Margaret Thatcher. Right? And this internationally recognized public figure involved parent had gained reputation was a man, Richard Blayler, who was in the parliament in England, right? So it really just starts to have them think beyond what I call regurgitation. I don't need mental regurgitation. I need to see how you're developing as a thinker, right? And besides, as you mentioned, the games, there are other components which I like. For example, any of you ever given your students talking about bias or diversity, there's something called implicit association test. It's a wonderful test, which, oh, I'm not biased. And guess what? We do hold sort of a biases and et cetera. There's always, as I mentioned, the supplementary readings. This is actually that they have to respond. They have discussion posts. And there are many other activities where they actually watch the video and I embed the question in a video. There's a program you could use, it's called 5HR, right? And you could actually design, you have them watch a small TED Talk, and intermittently within that 2 minutes, you say, so what was the previous component that was described by the speaker, right? I'm gonna stop here. We could leave, I guess, time for questions and Q&A, and yes, if anyone wants to share it, I'll share the information with you. Thank you.
So to close our conference, Dr. Sousa. Learning Resources at the college has the publication that they put out. I ordered it through the School of Education, but it's accessible to everyone. So we need a very big round of applause for our speaker today, who did a sensational job. We are so appreciative. Thank you so much. And our other two presenters, Dr. Yuli and Dr. Bellicon. Thank you so much. This is an annual event that we have at this campus, and we hope to see you all next year. Thank you so much. Safe travels, and thank you for coming.